Flying murder monkeys, angry trees, witches, wizards, and using the death of a dog as leverage against a young farm girl. The Wizard of Oz is a classic, and one that doesn't get any less nightmarish with age. Since the movie was filmed way before concepts like workplace safety and sobriety were invented, a lot of strange things went on during filming. People got hurt. Movie history was made. Worth it? Maybe. Let's see. One small voice. One of the tough things about The Wizard of Oz is separating fact from fiction, especially when it comes to long-standing rumors about the film's massive mob of munchkins. According to the munchkins themselves, there was no drunken carousing, no orgies, and no need for them to be picked up with butterfly nets for shooting the next morning. In fact, the stories make them sad, so cut it out. The core group of munchkins was made up of a troupe of European vaudeville actors called the Singer Midgets, but Munchkin Mickey Carroll was born in St. Louis. That meant that he had something big going for him. He could speak English. When it came time for filming, they needed people who could deliver what would become some pretty iconic lines. Carroll performed these lines along with Munchkin coroner Meinhard Robbie. It was Carroll who provided voices for the Lollipop Guild and even said the iconic, "Follow the Yellow Brick Road." By the end of filming, he'd spent 3 weeks doing voiceover work, including Auntie M's panicked shouts when the tornado hits, when she couldn't yell loud enough. Carroll was one of the last surviving Munchkins, dying in 2009 at 89 years old. We hope he found his own happiness at the end of the rainbow. The Wizard of Booze. Actor Frank Morgan played 5 different roles in Oz: Professor Marvel, the crying gatekeeper, the driver behind the horse of a different color, the wizard's guard, and the Wizard of Oz himself. But it wasn't just acting chops that got him through such an arduous schedule. The first day Morgan showed up on set, he had a briefcase, but carrying things like papers and scripts was for amateurs. His briefcase had a mini bar in it. Ray Bolger, who played the Scarecrow, said, "No matter how many times he retreated to the black briefcase, he was never less than a gentleman. Although, when he tried to stop drinking, he was often short-tempered and irritable." According to his wardrobe man, Morgan's drink of choice was champagne, and there was at least one incident where director Victor Fleming confronted Morgan and told him to drink more so he was tolerable on set.
Jimmy Cricket.
Ah, the good old days. King of the Forest. If you always thought that the Cowardly Lion's costume looked incredibly realistic, that's because, well, it was made from real lions. The idea had been to make a couple of costumes so actor Burt Lahr would be able to swap them out during filming, but the unique patterns of the real lion hides made that impossible since every costume would look different. Lahr ended up with one single costume that weighed about 60 pounds, which quickly filled with sweat under the hot studio lights. It became such a problem that the filmmakers needed to make a special purchase, an industrial drying bin to help get the costume a little less wet for the next day. Not included, Febreze. At least stunt doubles and stand-ins got to share a different sticky costume, which was close enough to the original to stand in during faraway shots. After filming, the costume was largely forgotten until it was rediscovered for a 1970 auction, where it sold for $2,400. It was later restored and went on to sell for $3.1 million, sweat included. Wardrobe malfunctions. Jack Haley made the Tin Man everything we all know and love, but a weird series of events put him there. The original cast list featured Buddy Ebsen as the Scarecrow and Ray Bolger as the Tin Man, but that's obviously not how things turned out. The story goes that Bolger wanted to be the Scarecrow since he was a dancer and didn't want to be trapped inside a tin suit. He went to MGM honcho Mervyn LeRoy and said he'd been cast in the wrong role. They allowed Ebsen and Bolger to swap roles, and some of the movie was even filmed before Ebsen was sent to the hospital with a major allergic reaction to the aluminum dust that he was painted with. According to Ebsen, no one believed he was sick, and he was ordered back to the set. That is until, thankfully, medical personnel got involved. Ebsen would go on to complain of breathing problems for the rest of his life, and he didn't even get to be in the movie. Jack Haley was hired, and the studio switched to using aluminum paste rather than dust, and that quickly gave Haley a severe eye infection, so filming was delayed again. Burn the Witch. Margaret Hamilton, who played the Wicked Witch, was the type to suffer for her craft. And while there were a whole bunch of accidents during filming that would have today's stars calling their lawyers, her on-set mishap ranks right at the top. The first take of the witch leaving Munchkinland went perfectly, but director Victor Fleming wanted another take just in case. During take 2, Hamilton's hat and coat caught on fire, burning layers of skin off her face and hands. That's pretty bad, right? Well, it gets worse. The only way to get the green paint off of her burned skin was with alcohol. She left the set for 6 weeks and returned before she had completely healed. Since they couldn't reapply the green paint, she wore gloves for the rest of the filming. Not surprisingly, she had lost a bit of faith in the special effects department and refused to do any more fire-related scenes. They still had that famous skywriting sequence to film, and that required an actress who was willing to sit on a prop broomstick that spewed smoke. Long story short, it was a pipe, it was filled with fire, and it exploded. Hamilton's stunt double Betty Danko was hospitalized for 11 days. Presumably, she never worked with fire again either. There was a huge amount of asbestos on set. It's obvious that back in the good old days when doctors prescribed cocaine and cigarettes to cure whatever ailed you, we didn't always know what we were doing when it came to science and human bodies. Which is why pure uncut asbestos was used in just about everything, including the scene in The Wizard of Oz where Dorothy's gang falls asleep in the field and snow begins to fall. Obviously, that's not snow that's falling on them, but the choice of asbestos was perhaps short-sighted. The film stars were all covered with asbestos fibers, and at the time, it wasn't that odd. Asbestos was often used to simulate fake snow, even in department stores. Do you know what else contained asbestos? Everything that needed to be fireproofed, including the Wicked Witch's broom and part of the Scarecrow's costume. That's right, Ray Bolger was dancing around in asbestos, under falling asbestos, not even knowing he was giving cancer the big ol' middle finger, until his death from cancer in 1987. The $80,000 jitterbug. By the end of filming, MGM decided that The Wizard of Oz was about 20 minutes too long. The first thing that got the axe was a scene that had taken an entire 5 weeks to film and cost a mind-blowing $80,000, or $1.4 million in today's money. The premise was pretty simple. The Wicked Witch sends a swarm of bugs, which were known for giving their victims the jitters, to distract Dorothy's group while her henchmen swooped in. But really, it played like an excuse to do a contemporary dance number in the middle of the haunted forest, which was still a lot nicer than the Wicked Witch from L. Frank Baum's novels, who sent out killer bees to sting the party to death instead. There was more to the whole jitterbug plot, but with bits and pieces of the story falling off the original script, only one portion of it remained in the final film. Too bad it made no sense without the whole dancing scene.
They'll give you no trouble, I promise you that. I've sent a little insect on ahead to take the fight out of them.
The whole out-of-place reference to a modern dance fad was way too odd to keep, and that's saying something for a movie that starred a robot and a living bunch of hay.
Old Hollywood is synonymous with class, sophistication, and images of matinee idols chastely stealing kisses on the silver screen. In reality, though, all sorts of bonkers nonsense was going on behind the scenes. Here's a look at some classic film stars who were actually really weird people. Cary Grant loved LSD. In 1960, the editors at Good Housekeeping magazine got a strange call. Cary Grant, the suave, sophisticated film star who almost never gave interviews, was on the line and wanted to talk about the magnificent amount of LSD he'd dropped. Yup, plagued by personal demons, Grant finally found peace when his third wife introduced him to the wonders of acid, which he dropped over 100 times between 1958 and 1961. And he wanted everyone to experience the same wonderful benefit. So he went on a campaign to promote the benefits of LSD, which according to the biography Cary Grant, A Touch of Elegance, included Grant saying things like, "It releases inhibition. You know, we are all unconsciously holding our anus. In one LSD dream, I all over the rug and all over the floor. Another time, I imagined myself as a giant penis launching off from the earth like a spaceship." Sold.
I don't know, sir, but it looks like a giant dick.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it looks like a huge...
Pecker!
Oh, where?
It's not a woodpecker, it looks like someone's...
Privates! We have reports of an unidentified flying object!
Orson Welles hated his nose. Most people who get nose jobs want to make their nose smaller, but legendary writer, director, and actor Orson Welles was obsessed with making his nose larger. He thought his real nose was too small for his round face, so in every movie, he had a fake nose made. And as his career went along, those noses got bigger and bigger and bigger. When he finished a film, Welles kept his noses, named them, and stored them in his Hollywood home, where he would occasionally take them out at parties and perform magic tricks with them. That's the sort of crazy you get away with when you've directed the best film ever made. Joan Crawford was an egomaniac. In one of the most famous cases of a star having a secret weird side, Joan Crawford was outed by her adopted daughter Christina as a jealous egomaniac in the infamous memoir Mommy Dearest, which was later turned into a hit movie. An account of her time as Crawford's ward, it made the Hollywood star sound like the mother from hell. Among other tidbits were harrowing descriptions of the physical abuse Crawford occasionally unleashed on her children, the revelation that Crawford lied when she told Christina her birth mother was dead, and of course the famous meltdown over wire hangers. Some claim the book wasn't entirely true, but considering Crawford was so weird, she once sabotaged her own movie in order to spite rival Bette Davis. Separating truth from fiction is nearly impossible. Peter Sellers was afraid of purple. The star who gave us Dr. Strangelove and Inspector Clouseau wasn't just a weirdo. He was apparently also such a monumental butthead that few could stand to be around him. Peter Sellers would have screaming meltdown tantrums on set. He'd freak out at his wives, smash crockery, and threaten them with his shotgun. He'd even get low-level people fired on movies as a way of venting his frustrations against people like producers and directors who were more powerful than he was. He was also profoundly superstitious. So when director Vittorio De Sica told him the color purple represented death, Sellers took it way too literally. According to the biography Mr. Strangelove, Sellers became convinced the color purple could kill. He refused to be in rooms with it and would have screaming tantrums if he came into contact with it. Elizabeth Taylor's spiteful engagements. Elizabeth Taylor's hell-raising is so infamous that her private life was publicly denounced by the Vatican. Over her lifetime, she married 8 times, had endless affairs, and took great pride in the offense she caused. Sometimes her behavior was truly outrageous. After marrying and divorcing Richard Burton twice, Taylor was so upset that she got engaged just to spite him. While working on the play Private Lives, Taylor and Burton brought out the worst in each other. They separately turned up drunk. They broke character. They skipped performances. When Taylor missed a show, Burton got fed up, went to Vegas, and married Sally Hay. When Taylor heard the news, she was so furious, she announced her engagement to Victor Luna, upstaging Burton. Not that she hated her ex-husband. Later in life, Taylor claimed they would have married a 3rd time if only Burton hadn't died. Katharine Hepburn hated nudity. The best way to describe Katharine Hepburn is fiercely independent. She lived as if married with both women and men, all while acting like it was no big deal. Part of that, though, was that she had plausible deniability, as according to the book Kate, the woman who was Katharine Hepburn, the famed actress not only didn't like physical intimacy, she hated nudity to the point where she would walk out on a film if there was a scene showing someone naked. So why did Hepburn loathe nudity and physical romance so much? According to a college friend, she tried intercourse once and, quote, just didn't like it. Fair enough. Clark Gable was obsessed with cleanliness. They say that cleanliness is next to godliness, but matinee idol Clark Gable took it to a whole new level. According to Warren G. Harris's biography of Gable, the star shaved his chest and armpits because he didn't like sweating. He also didn't like baths because it meant soaking in your own dirty water. So he always showered, even carrying his own portable shower around with him when he was in the Army. Considering his obsession with hygiene, it's ironic that Gable's Gone with the Wind co-star Vivien Leigh later publicly called him out for having bad breath. Still, no matter what people said about his weird ways, he always had the perfect comeback.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Grace Kelly became the Princess of Monaco when she married Prince Rainier III, but was married life truly more luxurious than her former life in Hollywood? Here's why Grace Kelly's marriage was more complicated than you thought. In 1955, Grace Kelly was on a trip to the Cannes Film Festival in France when she agreed to be a part of a magazine cover with Prince Rainier III. Per biography, she rerouted to the Princess Palace of Monaco for the shoot, only to jet back to Cannes afterward. As her friend Gone with the Wind star Olivia de Havilland recalled to People, she was in a state of enchantment. Enchanted she may have been, but the blonde beauty was already engaged to fashion designer Oleg Cassini. When Kelly called off her wedding to Cassini, he reportedly bluntly said of Prince Rainier, "One of the reasons I believe you're marrying this man is because this is the best script that you ever received in your life." And while Grace did indeed get the role of her lifetime, her complicated marriage would eventually take center stage. In fact, according to the book Once Upon a Time, behind the fairy tale of Princess Grace and Prince Rainier, the actor hinted that maybe it wasn't her choice who she ended up marrying, as she reportedly told a friend, "Do you realize if my mother hadn't been so difficult about Oleg Cassini, I probably would have married him? That one decision changed my entire future." While the union between Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier III wasn't officially an arranged marriage, many have alleged otherwise. As the author of the book Once Upon a Time wrote, Grace once alluded that her parents pushed her to marry Prince Rainier, but what exactly did a royal have to gain from it? According to Grace Kelly, The Secret Life of a Princess, at the time, Monaco had an independence agreement with neighboring France, which ruled that the sovereign city-state would revert to French control if the Grimaldi royal family failed to produce an heir. Although Prince Rainier was in a relationship with a French actor before meeting Grace, the woman wasn't able to have children. As a result, the Rear Window actor was subject to a physical examination to make sure the same issue didn't happen to the Grimaldis again. After the exam and a shocking $2 million dowry, Prince Rainier and Grace courted for a mere 2 weeks, and then he popped the question. While the marriage may have been political, it was allegedly economical too. As film producer Robert Evans claimed in his autobiography, The Fat Lady Sang, it was actually Aristotle Onassis who came up with the idea. Per Evans, Onassis told Rainier, "The right bride could do for Monaco's tourism what the coronation of Queen Elizabeth did for Great Britain." Like any royal wedding, the 1956 union between Prince Rainier III and Grace Kelly was a highly publicized affair. As Vanity Fair details, there were almost 2,000 reporters present during the ceremony. Plus, MGM filmed the wedding and broadcast it live to over 30 million European viewers. While there's no doubt a royal getting married is an exciting moment, it's the historical timing of it that makes it so iconic. As their son, Prince Albert, told People years later, "It was such an incredible affair, and it's left such a mark on people. But what it's meant for Monaco, for people around the world, and how their story continues to fascinate people, that's something unimaginable." While many dubbed the fairy tale the wedding of the century, Grace reportedly quipped that it was the carnival of the century per Vanity Fair. Prince Albert indeed confirmed his mother's anxiousness around the entire event, telling People, "Mom said it was overwhelming. It was so exhausting. When they left on their honeymoon and got on the boat, they both just kind of passed out from exhaustion and had a good night's sleep before they got on with enjoying their honeymoon the next day." Of course, being one of the most in-demand actors in the mid-1950s meant Grace Kelly had a thriving social life. 1954 was a big year for the star as she received her first Academy Award nomination and even won her first Golden Globe. At that point, she signed a 7-year contract with MGM and also began working with the legendary Alfred Hitchcock, who became her, quote, friend and mentor. And in 1955, she won an Academy Award for her role in Country Girl.
When I was acting, my private life was very much my own.
However, Grace Kelly's marriage in 1956 to Prince Renier III effectively wiped her Tinseltown dreams away. According to Once Upon a Time, behind the fairy tale of Princess Grace and Prince Renier, Princess Grace would invite her A-list pals to visit her in Monaco and spend time at the palace. However, Renier would apparently cringe, especially when friends would call his wife Gracie instead of using her princess title. The tension between the couple was portrayed in the 2014 movie Grace of Monaco starring Nicole Kidman. Sadly, Kelly didn't realize that marrying Prince Renier would mean throwing her acting dreams aside. Grace told the Los Angeles Times in 1964, "I miss acting. Once you're bitten with the acting bug, you never really get over it."
I don't feel as though I achieved enough in my career to stand out more than many other people.
Unfortunately for Grace, Renier disapproved of the actor resuming her silver screen career. He reportedly once declared to the press, per kinfolk, "I don't want my wife to work." This sentiment would continue later on in their lives too, as biographer James Spada told the South Florida Sun-Sentinel, "I feel that the prince contributed to her unhappiness in later life. He was not an emotionally giving person. He did not let her live her own life. When she began giving her annual poetry readings, her way of finding a means of self-expression, he didn't attend them for several years." In the mid-70s, an opportunity came for Grace to get a taste of her old life back. According to Once Upon a Time, in 1976, the Rear Window star's old agent, Jake Cantor, contacted her about a business opportunity with 20th Century Fox to have Grace serve as the first woman on the board. To Cantor's surprise, Grace accepted. However, the main reason for Princess Grace's desire to serve as a board member was the opportunity to be involved in show business again, as meetings were either in Los Angeles or New York. Kinfolk quotes her as explaining, "It gets me away from Monaco at least 4 times a year." If you push aside the apparent fact that Prince Renier III and Grace Kelly came from different backgrounds, thus causing snags in their marriage, their time together was complicated romantically too. In fact, many have suggested that both parties were involved in extramarital affairs. According to celebrity biographer Wendy Lee, within a mere month of their wedding, Renier had gotten involved with at least 3 other women. Lee wrote in her book True Grace, "Grace was humiliated and she was extremely unhappy." Interestingly enough, it's reported that Princess Grace didn't take her husband's salacious romps quietly. She once reportedly revealed to her hairstylist, according to The Express, "I know my husband has affairs with other women. That's very frustrating to me and makes me very unhappy." As a result, the former actor reportedly reignited some of her old flames, such as with Marlon Brando and Frank Sinatra.
Not everybody's lucky enough to marry a prince.
Grace Kelly and Prince Renier III had 3 children, Prince Albert, Princess Caroline, and Princess Stephanie. However, their familial relations weren't exactly flourishing. Caroline revealed in Albert II of Monaco, The Man and the Prince, "For my brother and I, Nanny Maureen was the key figure in our life. When we were little, we were probably closer to our nanny than to our parents." That being said, it's not like the Grimaldi children didn't have any strong ties to their parents. Albert was apparently much closer to his mother than his father. Albert told People, "Coming to live here and having to behave in a certain way must have been hard for her at first."
My children give me a great deal of happiness.
As for Prince Renier, it seems that as his children grew up, he finally wished he treated them with more paternal fondness, with the Chicago Tribune quoting him as musing, "My only regret is to have not been available enough to take care of my children during their tender years, and it is too late to make up for lost time." After silver screen legend Grace Kelly became Princess Grace of Monaco, many believe that she became incredibly depressed living in the microstate. In fact, the book High Society: The Life of Grace Kelly reveals that the actor even once boldly told a reporter, I don't expect to be happy, and I don't look for happiness. While the biography suggested that Grace wasn't suffering from depression all the time, she still had periods of sadness and loneliness. Grace herself alluded to the difficulties of suddenly moving across the pond, as she said in a 2020 interview in 1982, Mediterranean countries don't accept change very easily. Many have compared Princess Grace's experience marrying into royalty as that of the late Princess Diana's, and interestingly enough, the two crossed paths too, as Lady Diana once revealed in Diana her true story in her own words. I remember meeting Princess Grace and how wonderful and serene she was, but there was troubled water under her. I saw that. Much like the incredible amount of paparazzi that has plagued the British royal family, Prince Rainier III and Grace Kelly never really had any privacy. As the author of Grace Kelly, Hollywood Dream Girl, revealed to Closer Weekly, the one thing that she would talk about was time. She would say that she wanted privacy a little bit. The former Hollywood icon allegedly had no idea how rarely she would be able to escape for some one-on-one time with her husband. Interestingly enough, at the time of Grace and Rainier's wedding in the mid-1950s, Monaco wasn't the glamorous playground for the wealthy that it is now. Biographer Jeffrey Robinson told Closer Weekly, "The electricity and plumbing were 19th century French, and even the telephones didn't work." With a sudden shift of lifestyle, along with her personal life suddenly being put under the microscope, it's no wonder that this royal marriage was as complicated and exhausting as it was. Unfortunately for Grace and Rainier, the paparazzi weren't just after them, but their children too. Her daughter Stephanie had to go to her gymnastics classes in the trunk of their car, as Princess Grace revealed in a 1982 2020 interview, just so the paparazzi wouldn't follow her. After her death in 1982, many people have come forward to discuss Grace Kelly's alleged difficulties with her husband, Prince Rainier III. However, it's also possible that Kelly embraced her new family and marriage after leaving Hollywood. Princess Grace mused to 2020, the same year of her untimely death. "The paparazzi make up things. They make up romances. According to the press, my husband and I are constantly being divorced, which is also not the case." As for Rainier, while rumors of infidelity plagued the royal, he may have genuinely held a lot of love for his wife. According to My Days with Princess Grace of Monaco, Prince Rainier never recovered from the loss of Grace and never remarried. Per the New York Times, Grace Kelly died in Monte Carlo on September 14, 1982, suffering a cerebral hemorrhage as a result of a fatal car accident. It's been suggested that the Grimaldi royal family, much like a handful of other historical families, are cursed. According to Britannica, the Grimaldis originally hailed from Genoa, Italy, officially gaining control of Monaco in 1419. Prince Rainier III's great-grandfather, Albert I, gave Monaco a constitution in 1911. That being said, the menacing lore that has plagued the family persisted even before then. Per ABC News, the story goes that in the 13th century, Prince Rainier kidnapped a witch who cursed the entire family's bloodline and declared, "Never will a Grimaldi find true happiness in marriage." Sure enough, things haven't exactly been easy for the Monaco royal family since then, and as The Independent so succinctly put it, scandal, divorce, and rumors of infidelity have dogged them for decades. They have been dubbed Europe's most dysfunctional family. Rumors of curses aside, it seems that Grace Kelly and Prince Rainier III's marriage was filled with talk of infidelity, and the world is yet to recover from Princess Grace's traumatic and untimely death. In the horror genre, few movies are as iconic and revered as F.W. Murnau's 1922 silent vampire tale Nosferatu. But like any film worth its salt, this one was a nightmare to make. This is the true story behind Nosferatu. German director F.W. Murnau is most often credited for Nosferatu's unique atmosphere and imagery, and rightly so. Murnau would go on to massive success for films like 1924's The Last Laugh, 1926's Faust, and 1927's Sunrise. But equally deserving in praise for the film is Albin Grau, Nosferatu's producer, and an experienced occultist. Grau was a member of a hermetic order named Fraternitas Saturni, or Brotherhood of Saturn. Many believe it was Grau's spiritual relationship with the occult that lent Nosferatu its chilling ambience, and one can even see hermetic and occult symbols in certain scenes. When Grau started the production company that made the film, it was meant to focus on films solely of a spiritual or supernatural nature. Many critics will point out that Nosferatu is a ripoff of Dracula, and to be fair, that's exactly what it is.
I read that book. Monroe gave it to me.
Before the widespread popularity of Bram Stoker's novel, vampires were folk legends rather than part of pop culture. But apparently, while Grau wanted to film Dracula, he had actually become interested in vampires even before reading the novel, when he was stationed in Serbia during World War I. In a 1921 article, Grau explained that a Serbian farmer told him about how his father had become a vampire. The farmer's father had died and was buried without receiving the holy sacraments. A month later, a string of deaths occurred, and then witnesses reported seeing the farmer's father walking around. Locals exhumed his coffin and found it empty. The next morning, they returned and found a healthy-looking man with teeth so long and pointy that he couldn't close his mouth. A stake was driven through the corpse's heart before it was cremated. While Grau's story might have been a way to drum up hype for his film, Eastern Europe has always been where the legends of vampires as we know them, the blood-drinking nocturnal undead, have originated. The country was home to some of the earliest European vampire hysteria, in part focused around the folkloric character Sava Savanović. That Grau would have heard this story in Serbia makes sense. Though Nosferatu's creators gave their central vampire a look and feel all its own, at its heart it's simply Bram Stoker's Dracula, but with the character names altered for the simple reason that Grau couldn't obtain the rights for the novel from Stoker's estate. The job of trying to dodge litigation fell on screenwriter Henrik Galeen. He changed names, settings, descriptions, and even the cast of the story in order to adapt Stoker's lengthy novel into a silent film. Count Dracula became Graf Orlok, Jonathan Harker became Thomas Hutter, Renfield became Knock, and Mina Harker became Ellen Hutter. Many of the novel's supporting characters, such as Professor Van Helsing and Cowboy Quincy Morris, are absent entirely. Unfortunately, the writer's hard work was not enough to keep the production company out of legal hot water. The actor playing Graf Orlok, one Max Schreck, has been the subject of rumors over the years. The most common one is that he was in fact a vampire himself, a concept that was turned into the full-length horror film Shadow of the Vampire starring Willem Dafoe as the undead Schreck. While the story is obviously untrue, everything about Schreck did little to dispel these rumors.
This script girl, I'll eat her later.
According to biographer Stefan Eickhoff, Schreck was no supernatural creature, but rather a versatile actor with an unusual temperament. He was a civil servant's son with over 800 screen and stage roles and was, quote, a loyal, conscientious loner with no family to speak of. Schreck was also known for his detached, offbeat sense of humor, leading one of his contemporaries to claim that he lived in his own, quote, remote and strange world. Of course, it certainly didn't help his reputation that the word Schreck is German for terror, immediately painting the man as an intimidating figure. While different depictions of vampires cherry-pick their strengths and weaknesses, fearing the crucifix, casting no reflection in mirrors, transforming into bats, one of the universally recognized tropes is that vampires are killed by direct sunlight. However, this wasn't always a common concept. In fact, Bram Stoker's Count Dracula walks around in the sun. He's merely weakened by it. It was Nosferatu's climax that cemented the idea of sunlight killing the vampire into the minds of the public. And it was Murnau who came up with the idea of the vampire being disintegrated by the rays of the dawn. While the poetry of the final scene is laid on thick, Ellen sacrifices herself to the vampire so that he, drunk on her innocent blood, doesn't notice the rising sun until it's too late. Really, the use of this special effect was just a cheap alternative to a grisly death scene. The folkloric way to dispense with a vampire involved driving a stake through its heart, cutting its head off, and burning the corpse, which wasn't easy to show on screen.
Ooh!
But Nosferatu wasn't widely viewed after its release due to it being destroyed via court order. So whether the sun as vampire repellent spread quickly among the few folklore enthusiasts who saw the film, or whether Murnau had heard about it in some rare piece of lore is unknown. For a work of art as atmospheric and macabre as Nosferatu, Grau and Murnau couldn't simply host the world premiere in a movie theater. Instead, the film premiered with the kind of event one wishes more horror movies launched with, an epic costume party at a zoo. Nosferatu premiered March 4, 1922 at the Marble Hall of the Berlin Zoological Gardens. Before the film, there was a stage show, including a spoken-word prologue by star Max Schreck himself, followed by a dance number. After the showing, there was an elaborate masquerade ball, complete with gowns, frocks, and suitable costumes to honor such a morbid film. The party, dubbed the Festival of Nosferatu, raged until 2 a.m., with guests including German filmmakers Ernst Lubitsch and Heinz Schall. The party and promotional campaigns surrounding the film apparently cost more than the movie itself. Thankfully, this elaborate event has been recreated to a certain degree today. Austin, Texas hosts an annual Nosferatu festival, inviting fans from all over the world to travel to America's city of bats and celebrate all things vampiric. Given the climate of anti-Semitism in Europe during the first third of the 20th century, it's unsurprising to learn that many saw Nosferatu as an inherently anti-Semitic film. Jews had for some time been cast as blood-drinking witches by anti-Semites, and the similarities between the vampire Graf Orlok and contemporary stereotypes of Judaism lent the movie a bigoted undertone. One member of the audience at Nosferatu's premiere leaped on this concept, Julius Streicher, who would become chief editor of Hitler's anti-Semitic newspaper Der Stürmer. Streicher was so transfixed by the film that he returned to watch it repeatedly. Later on, in the pages of Der Stürmer, Streicher would repeatedly use art and prose to conflate Jews with vampires. While it has since been noted that Murnau was friendly with many Jewish people in the film industry, the feeling that Nosferatu was made to stoke the fear of the universal other, a claim often made about Dracula as well, remains to this day. As noted earlier, Nosferatu was a direct adaptation of Bram Stoker's novel Dracula, with names and references changed to avoid a copyright infringement lawsuit. That did not work. Why? Well, the makers of the film weren't ready for the sheer tenacity of the enemy they had made, Florence Balcom, Stoker's widow. After her husband's death, Balcom's only real source of income was the royalties from Dracula, his one truly successful book. When she discovered that Grau and Murnau had made the film, she demanded financial compensation. When they dodged this, she demanded that all copies of their film be destroyed. Despite Nosferatu's producers doing their best to avoid Balcom's wrath, Stoker's widow won. The German courts ordered all prints and negatives of Nosferatu to be burned in one of the first cases of capital punishment being waged against the film. However, by then, copies of the movie had been distributed throughout the world, and as one can guess, the fact that Nosferatu is such an iconic film means that it was not entirely lost. Though Nosferatu is considered a cinematic milestone today, at the time it was a risky money-making venture that had cost a ton to promote. When Bram Stoker's widow decided to take legal action against Prana Film, producer Alban Grau had only a few options when it came to avoiding lawsuits, so he chose one of the extreme ones and declared bankruptcy. Prana Film's finances had always been precarious, but the threat of litigation, and one with actual merit behind it, would have been too much for the production company to bear. Grau's declaration of bankruptcy made Nosferatu the only feature Prana Film would ever make. Meanwhile, Grau sold the movie to Deutsche Film Production in order to immediately distance himself from the production. That company, incidentally, edited the film without Murnau's permission. The result of the film being banned is that many of the copies of Nosferatu that survived were incomplete, re-edited, or had their title cards changed, so every version of the film is different. One such unique copy was The 12th Hour, A Night of Horror, a sound version of the film released in 1930 by Deutsche Film Production. Featuring new scenes, a different ending, the inclusion of footage that didn't make the original film, and even a different actor playing the vampire in similar makeup, The 12th Hour was shown in theaters and on television around the world, but is now difficult to find, and stands as a testament to how original movies were recut and re-released before the art form was commonplace. Interestingly enough, even Bram Stoker's widow couldn't kill the vampire after she'd ordered it burned. According to David J. Scull's Hollywood Gothic, shortly after she'd won her case against Nosferatu, Balcom received an invitation to a private film society screening of F.W. Murnau's Dracula. At the end of the day, the most iconic depiction of Dracula will always be Bela Lugosi in Todd Browning's 1931 film by Universal. The cape, the widow's peak, the thick Eastern European accent.
Children of the night, what music they make.
And yet, for many film critics, Nosferatu's ugly, ethereal depiction of the vampire makes it a superior film to its latter-day, properly licensed descendants. In fact, renowned film critic Roger Ebert gave the movie 4 stars out of 4 stars, saying on his website, "To watch F.W. Murnau's Nosferatu is to see the vampire movie before it had really seen itself. Here's the story of Dracula before it was buried alive in cliches, jokes, TV skits, cartoons, and more than 30 other films. The film is in awe of its material. It really seems to believe in vampires." Nosferatu has been directly remade once. German filmmaker Werner Herzog directed infamous character actor Klaus Kinski as Count Dracula in 1979's Nosferatu Phantom der Nacht. However, it appears as though a new version of Nosferatu is in the works. According to Bloody Disgusting, Robert Eggers, director of stark psychological horror films The Witch and the Lighthouse, is planning a remake of Murnau's classic film. The director has stated that he is drawn to the film for its primordial depiction of the vampire, as well as for producer Alban Grau's occultist vision, explaining, "I think Nosferatu is closer to the folk vampire. The vampire played by Max Schreck is a combination of the folk vampire, of the literary vampire that actually has its roots in England before Germany, and also has roots in Alban Grau, the producer-production designer's occultist theories on vampires." There's a lot going on beneath the sunny and earnest, innocent surface of The Sound of Music that you probably didn't recognize when you watched it as a kid, so get ready for some of your favorite things to be the details that only adults notice in this classic film. The romance between Governess Maria and Captain Von Trapp is presented as perfectly prudish. The two initially fight their mutual attraction, remaining platonic until their splashy church wedding. But there's a lot of innuendo underneath the surface if you look for it. For example, Maria tells the captain that she fell in love with him when he blew that silly whistle, and the captain admits that he fell in love with her when she sat on a pine cone left on her chair by one of his children as a prank. The innuendo of these two symbols probably goes right over kids' heads, but adults know what's up.
Do you know when I first started loving you? That night at the dinner table when you sat on that ridiculous pine cone.
If you're still not convinced, consider what happens when Maria confesses to the governess that she fled the Von Trapp house because she's fallen hard for the captain. The abbess tells her that God is all for a good love story and that Maria must experience life before committing to the convent. Then she sings a song encouraging Maria to climb every mountain. If the mountain in question isn't Captain Von Trapp, we'll eat our shoes. One of the most memorable sequences in The Sound of Music is the Landler dance at the ball that Captain Von Trapp hosts. Maria and the children look on woefully from the outside as all the fancy folks dance. Maria then begins to teach the children a traditional Austrian dance called the Ländler, and when Captain Von Trapp notices, he begins dancing with Maria to demonstrate. By the end of the dance, everyone at the ball is turned on. But that dance isn't just a nice romantic moment that makes it clear that Maria and the captain are hot for each other. The two of them have to behave very carefully in public. If he touched her in a familiar way, it would be a scandal. But dance has always been a loophole. By dancing with her in public, he gets a few uninterrupted minutes to touch Maria and be close to her without causing an outrage. Dance has been part of the public courtship ritual for centuries, so there's a very good reason why the Ländler scene ends with Baroness Schrader openly horrified at what she's just witnessed. As every adult in the room knows, Maria and the captain were basically making out in their heads. The Sound of Music is generally clear on a couple of things. The Nazis are the bad guys and the Nazis are no good. There's no real wiggle room here, and that's clear even when you're a kid. But when you watch the movie as an adult, you realize that it still kind of downplays how evil the Nazis actually were. Captain Von Trapp seems to dislike them because they want to force him to serve in their navy and go to Berlin, not because they committed genocide and were determined to invade most of Europe. You could argue that The Sound of Music is set before the world was generally aware that the Nazis were about to launch one of the greatest genocides of all time. But even from that perspective, the depiction of Captain Von Trapp's conflict with them still doesn't hold water. Austria hadn't existed as a separate country for very long at that point, and someone like Captain Von Trapp would have been more likely to want Austria to become part of Germany. Thus, as historian Peter Levine has argued, the filmmakers contrived an Austrian character who was anti-Nazi without once mentioning any of the things that made the Nazis evil. Despite very much having the hots for the captain, Maria is interpreted by some viewers as subliminally homosexual. From the very beginning, she's an outsider who's troubled and uncertain about herself, which is something that many LGBTQ individuals can readily identify with. She's also styled in a subtly butch manner with a short, boyish haircut, and in the beginning of the film, she's dressed in an androgynous way that symbolizes her conflict between becoming a nun and becoming a wife. It's easy to take this one step further and imagine that she's trying to decide if she's straight or not so straight. As noted by historian Stacey Ellen Wolfe in her book A Problem Like Maria, it's unsurprisingly common for queer women to have a crush on Julie Andrews in The Sound of Music at an age when they're just starting to figure out their own orientation. They see Maria as a symbol of freedom because she spends most of the first half of the movie rejecting the traditional roles that she's asked to play. She won't be the chaste and obedient perfect nun, nor will she be Captain Von Trapp's idea of the perfect governess, thus symbolically rejecting traditional gender roles. She seeks joy in her life despite the disapproval of others, so it's no wonder that she's a queer touchstone. When you're a kid, the doomed romance between Rolf and Liesel is probably one of the most boring parts of The Sound of Music, but you nevertheless know that Rolf becomes a bad guy in the end, turning on Liesel just when she needs him to be her friend. With older eyes, you probably start booing every time Rolf shows up on screen because he's objectively a jerk from the very beginning. Our introduction to Rolf includes an exchange of dialogue that makes it clear that he's already a part of the Hitler Youth and cheering on the Nazis from afar.
I trust everything is under control?
Yes, yes.
Good.
Are there, any developments?
Perhaps.
And he just gets worse and worse over the course of the film. He's manipulative and abusive toward Liesel, refusing to communicate with her and then acting like she's the crazy one. He also calls her a baby during the performance of I'm 16 going on 17, which is kind of sexist. Simply put, just about everything he does is the behavior of an abuser. If you don't pay close attention, you might make the mistake of thinking Baroness Schrader is a villain. After all, we know that Captain Von Trapp and Maria are destined to be together even if we're unaware of the true story behind the film. We're primed to hate the Baroness just because she's Maria's rival. Furthermore, she engages in a series of superficially villainous acts, like scheming to send the children off to boarding school and telling Maria that the captain is falling in love with her because she knows that will make Maria leave immediately. But in reality, none of these things are particularly evil. The children behave terribly towards the Baroness because they prefer Maria, so believing that they might need some discipline isn't unjustified. And while her motivation behind telling Maria about the captain's feelings is clearly selfish, she doesn't lie, nor does she force Maria to do anything. And when it becomes painfully clear that she's lost the captain to Maria, she's the only one in this love triangle to behave with class. She makes it easy for the captain to break up with her, and she makes no effort to take revenge on Maria or stop their marriage by spreading rumors. She's all class.
Auf Wiedersehen, darling.
The original Broadway musical version of The Sound of Music was first staged in 1959, so it's not surprising that the gender roles in the film aren't exactly progressive. But even for the time period standards, they're actually kind of shockingly bad. For example, the film presents an extremely unrealistic ideal for women. The teenage Liesl is presented as a total innocent, completely ignorant of all aspects of men and romance. And this is clearly a good thing as far as the film is concerned. The I'm 16 going on 17 scene is intended to be funny because even though Rolf isn't much older or more experienced than Liesl, the song's lyrics still support the idea that the best way for a young girl to be is totally unprepared to face a world of men. Later on, Maria advises Liesl that when a woman marries a man, she belongs to him like a piece of property. Since this is coming from a cheerful Julie Andrews, it comes across as the most obvious truth in the world. And in the film's universe, the only way that Maria calms down and finds happiness is when she lands a husband, which is not exactly encouraging.
So many things I think I should know, but I don't. I really don't. How can you?
One thing that kids and adults can surely agree on about The Sound of Music is that Uncle Max is delightful. He's that fun family friend you adore as a kid and like to drink with as an adult. But when you grow up, you realize that he's also the darkest part of the film. Because while it's not explicit, there's plenty of reasons to believe that Max is both Jewish and gay, which is cause for concern when the Nazis arrive. According to historian Peter Levine, Max is presented as, quote, the money-grubbing urbanite, which is a notoriously prejudicial Jewish stereotype. The film was released in 1965 and aimed at families, so it's not surprising that the filmmakers chose to keep things light, but it's hard to miss the darker undertones with older eyes. After spending most of the film looking out for himself, Max finally becomes selfless and helps the Von Trapps escape. But unlike the real person the character is based on, he stays behind. That means that a Jewish gay man who has just broken several laws is about to be arrested by members of the Nazi Party.
Heil Hitler! Or, Heil Hitler.
The Sound of Music is based on the real Maria Von Trapp's memoir, The Story of the Trapp Family Singers. But just because it's based on a real story doesn't mean it can be used to teach real history. The list of historical inaccuracies is very long, even if you just restrict it to the Von Trapp family's personal history. For one thing, the ages and names of the children were changed, as the eldest Von Trapp child was fully grown and a practicing physician when the family fled Austria, while 3 kids were simply omitted altogether. Furthermore, Maria and the captain got married nearly 10 years before they fled, and most notably, the reason the family became touring singers was because they had gone broke during the Great Depression and needed to make some money. And the film gets plenty of other history wrong beyond the Von Trapps. For example, Edelweiss isn't a traditional Austrian folk song. Instead, it was written by Richard Rodgers and Oscar Hammerstein for the musical. And the family didn't climb the Alps into Switzerland. For one thing, crossing the Alps would have brought them into Germany, where they definitely did not want to be. In reality, they didn't do any hiking at all, as they took a train to Italy. When you're a kid, the costumes in The Sound of Music probably come across as pretty pokey. But when you grow up, you just might realize that they perfectly indicate the status of each character. For example, Maria's clothes track her development. Initially, she's wearing the cast-off clothing given to her by the Abbey that are drab, boxy, and similar to what the children wear. But when she and the captain finally admit their feelings to each other, she's wearing a much more feminine gown that flows and shimmers. Her wedding dress is a fairly obvious symbol of transition. But what's really notable is the sophisticated outfit she wears after her honeymoon, symbolizing her ascension as both an adult and the woman of the house. Meanwhile, the captain starts off wearing military-style clothes that underscore his rigid, bitter life, and his children are dressed in drapes, marking them as just something else rattling around his house. By the end, he's dressed very similarly to his children, signifying his return to his family.
The Andy Griffith Show, which aired in 1960, was one of the most beloved and highly rated shows in television history. The untold truth of The Andy Griffith Show is that it was actually a spin-off series. Andy Griffith had an on-set affair, and a contract issue led to Don Knotts' departure. Not many people realize this, but The Andy Griffith Show was technically a spin-off of sorts. The first time Sheriff Andy Taylor made his appearance on television, he was a guest star on The Danny Thomas Show. In the episode, Danny Thomas drives through the town of Mayberry and gets pulled over by Sheriff Taylor for running an unnoticed stop sign. However, this version of Andy Taylor is far less kind than his latter incarnation that we know today.
Ooh-wee, that's quite a role you got there.
One of the series' running jokes is that Andy wields far more power in the small town than a sheriff might typically have, but he's at least fair. This version of Andy Taylor has no such scruples. When he finds Danny Thomas for his stop sign violation, he soon realizes that the TV star has access to plenty of money and doesn't hesitate to significantly increase the typical fine. Danny Thomas threatens to report Andy to the Justice of Peace, only to discover that Andy also serves that role as well. Next, Danny tries to report Andy's corruption to the media, but Andy is also the editor of the Mayberry Gazette, making his small-town power complete. The episode ends with Andy and Danny coming to an agreeable resolution, and audiences were later given the beloved The Andy Griffith Show. You wouldn't expect it as much from the mature Sheriff Andy Taylor, but Andy Griffith was quite the jokester on the set. According to Biography, Griffith delighted in pulling practical jokes on his fellow castmates. While his friend, Don Knotts, was napping, Griffith would often deliberately drop a metal film canister right near Knotts, letting it smash to the floor for maximum noise impact. Another time, Griffith sneaked into castmate George Lindsay's dressing room while he was sleeping and strung up duck guts around the room. Although they were good friends, Griffith also liked to needle Don Knotts about his real first name. Knotts' actual legal name was Jesse Donald Knotts. Apparently, Knotts had a particular loathing for his original first name, and whenever Griffith sought to rile him up, he'd refer to Knotts as Jess. But his fellow castmates could give it right back to Griffith. Seeking revenge, some of his co-stars once stole one of his shoes, and Griffith had to borrow a pair from the wardrobe crew to get himself home. At the end of the season, the cast ultimately did return the stolen shoe to Griffith, completely bronzed. Griffith might have been a prankster, but he could take it just as well as he could dish it out. Frances Bavier might be best known for her role as the kindly Aunt Bee, but she was actually a veteran stage actress, and a serious one at that. Bavier was a graduate of the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, worked in vaudeville, and later moved on to Broadway. Bavier was always the perfect professional, no matter what she was working on, be it drama or comedy, television or film, or stage or screen. However, she always retained a serious demeanor whenever she was working, regardless of whether the camera was on her or not. Andy Griffith was a jokester and a prankster, along with the rest of the cast, but Bavier despised practical jokes. She severely disapproved of Griffith's shenanigans around the set, and while the rest of the cast liked to dance and sing when they weren't filming, Bavier rarely joined them. At one point, she had an altercation with George Lindsay, who played Goober Pyle. Bavier loathed coarse language, and one day Lindsay happened to be cursing up a storm on the set of the sequel series Mayberry RFD, angering Bavier to the point where she clocked him with her umbrella. She thought Griffith and most of the cast weren't taking their job seriously, which caused some friction between her and Griffith. Don Knotts didn't have a contract on hand when he filmed his first episode of The Andy Griffith Show. According to Biography, if things didn't work out, he might have only guest starred for a single episode. However, the chemistry between Knotts and Andy Griffith couldn't be ignored, and Knotts was offered a 1-year contract to start, followed by a 5-year one. And with Don Knotts' arrival, the show took a drastically different turn than originally planned. Since the show was named after him, Andy Griffith was intended to be the leading funny man. However, Knotts proved to be the audience's favorite comedic actor, becoming the zany Barney Fife we all know and love, while Andy became the mild-mannered and level-headed member of the duo. When Knotts departed the show after 5 seasons, many fans felt the show wasn't quite the same without him. The gossipy Floyd Lawson, or Floyd the Barber, as the character was better known, was played by Howard McNear and was another fan favorite. Floyd's barbershop, and Floyd himself, served as the spot where Mayberry's men could get a haircut and get the lowdown on the latest happenings in the small town. McNear was considered a great actor and comedian, having had a long career in radio and later in television before he accepted the role of Floyd Lawson. However, in the middle of the show's run, McNear suffered a severe stroke that left his left side paralyzed. McNear was so beloved by fans and an excellent friend to the cast, no one could bear to write Floyd out of the show. Instead, Floyd's scenes in the later seasons were written to allow McNear to be seated or given him the appearance of standing using a bespoke stool. McNear was able to continue playing Floyd until 1967. To this day, Floyd the Barber remains one of the most memorable characters of The Andy Griffith Show. Anita Corso played Andy's primary love interest, Helen Crump, on the show, but she wasn't intended to stick around for the long term. Sheriff Taylor enjoyed brief relationships with other women on the show, but few ever stuck around for more than a few episodes. At one point, Writers tried to give Andy a serious long-term girlfriend in the form of pharmacist Ellie Walker, played by Eleanor Donahue. But the chemistry between the two actors just wasn't there. Although Donahue had signed a 3-year contract, she asked to be released after 1 year, citing that she and Griffith really didn't click on screen. Griffith himself admitted that he struggled to show real affection to Donahue's character, thus ending future appearances of Ellie Walker. But everything changed when Anita Corso was cast to play young Opie's new school teacher, Helen Crump. Again, she wasn't expected to last long, but Corso and Griffith's chemistry was electric. Arguably, maybe a little too electric. Andy Griffith was already married to Barbara Edwards at the time, but he and Corso became romantically involved on the set. Their relationship was apparently inadvertently discovered by a crew member delivering food to Andy Griffith's hotel room while he happened to be with Corso. Griffith and Edwards eventually divorced, but Corso never married Griffith. After season 5, Don Knotts left The Andy Griffith Show, and Barney's departure left a noted and significant gap in the show. There was a reason for Knotts' exit, and it all came down to communication issues. According to Biography, Andy Griffith initially told Don Knotts that the show would only last 5 seasons. So, Knotts prepared for the coming end of the show and started to line up more work in time for the season 5 conclusion. He ultimately signed a 5-film contract with Universal Studios. However, the network managed to persuade Andy Griffith to do a 6th season of the show, and later a 7th and 8th. Sadly, that meant Don Knotts had to decline due to his film contract. However, Andy Griffith revealed that at one point, Knotts offered to return to the show if he could have an ownership stake in the production. Griffith misunderstood Knotts' request, assuming that Knotts wanted half of Griffith's own share when Knotts was actually only looking for a much smaller stake. Knotts and Griffith were good friends, and ultimately didn't feel comfortable negotiating at this level with each other. The talks ended, and Knotts didn't return to the show. But that didn't stop the two from remaining friends for the rest of their lives. Before Gomer Pyle, USMC, Gomer was Mayberry's dim-witted but kind-hearted gas station attendant. According to Biography, Jim Nabors was introduced as the character in season 3 and stayed for 2 seasons, and audiences loved Gomer for his wacky hijinks and amiable personality.
Shazam! Captain Marvel wouldn't have thought of that, Barney.
After his 2 seasons, CBS proposed an entire spin-off show starring Nabors as Gomer Pyle. Thus, Gomer left Mayberry to join the Marines and gave audiences Gomer Pyle, USMC, in 1964. Those who loved Gomer on Andy Griffith were more than happy to watch him in a new environment, where Nabors would really have a chance to shine in a starring role, rather than just an ensemble. Gomer Pyle, USMC, was a major fan favorite and reached number 1 in the Nielsen ratings on quite a few occasions. After 8 seasons, The Andy Griffith Show came to an end in 1968, while it held the number 1 spot in Nielsen ratings. Throughout the show's entire 8-year run, The Andy Griffith Show never sank below number 7 in Nielsen's rankings. Both Don Knotts and Frances Bavier had won Emmys for their performances, and the show itself was nominated for Outstanding Comedy Series. And even after all that, the show didn't completely come to an end at that time. Where The Andy Griffith Show ended, so began the spin-off show, Mayberry RFD. Viewers just weren't ready to say goodbye to Mayberry just yet. However, the focus of Mayberry RFD was no longer on Andy Taylor. A new father-son duo, a widowed farmer named Sam Jones and his son Mike, became the leads. Andy Taylor kicked off the first season of the new show with his wedding to his longtime girlfriend, Helen Crump. But after that, he would only very occasionally pop up as a side character, keeping the story focused on Sam and Mike. Other characters from The Andy Griffith Show did carry on to Mayberry RFD in more prominent roles though, including Frances Bavier as Ann B., George Lindsay as Goober Pyle, and Jack Dodson as Howard Sprague. The cast of The Andy Griffith Show did get back together one more time in 1986 for a TV special called Return to Mayberry. Most of the surviving original cast made an appearance in the special, with the main exception being Frances Bavier, who turned down the offer to appear. This may have been due to health reasons or that Bavier felt she was finished playing the character. Her reasons were never confirmed.
What about this one?
Oh, well, you know, Aunt B always said I had a short lip.
But audiences were delighted to see Andy Griffith and Don Knotts together again in their iconic roles, along with the rest of the beloved characters like Gomer and Goober Pyle, Howard Sprague, and Ernest T. Bass. Fans were also happy to see the adult Ron Howard appear as a grown-up Opie, married with a journalism career and embarking on fatherhood. The movie wrapped up most loose ends and brought a happy conclusion to our time in Mayberry. Barney married his old girlfriend Thelma Lou after years apart, and Andy was re-elected as sheriff of Mayberry, with Barney at his side as deputy once again. A satisfying finish to one of the most revered shows in television history.
I Love Lucy was an instant hit all over the United States when it premiered in 1951, but behind the scenes, all was not as happy as it appeared on screen. Here's what even the show's biggest fans didn't know. Before Lucille Ball became known to the world as Lucy Ricardo, she worked as a B-film actress in the 1940s, starring in films for MGM. When her big break didn't come on the big screen, Ball decided to make a more direct play for the public's attention with a radio show. Ball quit film to star in the radio series My Favorite Husband for CBS Studios in 1948. My Favorite Husband followed the story of Liz Cugat and her husband George, a man who was constantly frustrated with his eccentric wife. Sound familiar? By the second season, with television on the rise, CBS brought Ball and offered to convert the show into a visual format. Husband ended after nearly 4 years to be adapted into the beloved television sitcom I Love Lucy. Lucille Ball met Desi Arnaz in Hollywood on the film set of Too Many Girls in 1940. Before the end of the year, they eloped to Connecticut to marry. Ball's career in film started to take off with an MGM contract, while Arnaz's petered out. Though his wife was earning money, Arnaz was going a little stir-crazy at home. So Arnaz, who had a successful career as an orchestra leader before doing movies, returned to his first love and began touring the country with his band. By 1944, Ball had filed for a divorce. According to biography, she was tired of his, quote, infidelities and heavy drinking. He was always out of town or out all night. Before the divorce was final, the couple made an arrangement to make it work. To do that, Ball believed she needed to find a way to keep Arnaz at home. When CBS offered her the opportunity to turn My Dear Husband into a series, she agreed to do it as long as it starred her husband. When Lucille Ball demanded Desi Arnaz be the lead in the televised version of My Dear Husband, CBS did not like the idea. Ball biographer Kathleen Brady told PBS that the studio was resistant because they didn't believe audiences would buy the American Ball's marriage to a Cuban immigrant.
No one wanted him to play my husband because he was Cuban, and they wanted a real American couple.
In order to prove America would love it, Ball and Arnaz took their act on the road. They created a well-reviewed slapstick routine they do on tour with Arnaz's band. By the end of 1950, CBS had given in and greenlit the couple to star in My Favorite Husband, which became I Love Lucy and starred America's favorite sweethearts, Lucy and Ricky Ricardo. Now that Lucille Ball had her first demand met, having her real-life husband Desi Arnaz star in I Love Lucy, it was time for her second, that the show be filmed in Los Angeles. The problem was, no show at that time had ever been shot in Los Angeles. It was a technical impossibility. Shows were broadcast from New York, then recorded on kinescopes. A kinescope was a camera that recorded live TV, so the recording could be sent to other markets throughout the country. The quality was terrible. According to the Directors Guild of America, Philip Morris, the show's sponsor, hated the idea of making I Love Lucy in Los Angeles. The sponsor feared that the kinescope process would mean the East Coast market would end up watching a terrible version of the show they were paying for. So Arnaz and Ball decided to shoot on film. That way, the show would always be preserved on a high-quality format. It's the reason you can still watch reruns of I Love Lucy to this day, but film was expensive, so more innovation was needed. To streamline the film production process, the show developed the multi-camera format of sitcom production. The show had adjoined sets, putting all the action in one place with a studio audience and shot continuously as if it were a play. They used 3 cameras simultaneously to record their wide, medium, and close-up shots. The technique was so fast and efficient that it's still used by sitcoms today. Even with the technical innovations created to shoot I Love Lucy as efficiently as possible, the show was still going over CBS's proposed budget. So Ball and Arnaz formed Desi Lou Productions and used $5,000 of their own money to produce the show's pilot, on the condition that they would fully own the final product. This was a genius move. Ball and Arnaz owned the show, meaning that if it was successful, they would make a lot more money than their weekly salary as actors. It also meant they would get any residuals or profits made off the show's reruns. I Love Lucy became a hit show, so Arnaz and Ball began to grow Desi Lou into a TV empire. After producing hits like The Untouchables and The Ann Sothern Show, Desi Lou sold their syndication rights back to CBS for $5 million. They would no longer receive money off of reruns, but they had enough money to buy RKO Studios in 1957. The massive studio lot soon became home to other hits like The Andy Griffith Show and The Dick Van Dyke Show, turning Desi Lou into an independent production powerhouse. During the second season of I Love Lucy, Lucille Ball became pregnant with the couple's second child, Desi Arnaz Jr. Desi Arnaz Sr. wanted to work this into the storyline of the show, but sponsor Philip Morris wasn't into the idea. Eventually, CBS and Philip Morris conceded. By that time, I Love Lucy was the #1 rated show on television, and Ball and Arnaz were never the type to back down. They were allowed to show Ball being pregnant and talk about her pregnancy on the condition that they were never allowed to use the word pregnant. This censorship actually assisted in making the episodes fun. Lucy tries to tell Ricky she's in the family way, but is continually blocked and distracted until finally she interrupts Ricky during a performance with his band. Ricky then begins singing We're Having a Baby. The storyline was a massive hit and stretched for 7 episodes leading up to the season 2 finale. The Ricardos' relationship was not the only one drawing viewers into the show. The partnership between characters Ethel Mertz and Lucy Ricardo was just as fraught with humor and conflict and became a key part of I Love Lucy's legacy. In an interview with PBS, Lucille Ball biographer Kathleen Brady agreed that the friendship between Ethel and Lucy was the show's, quote, most enduring influence. Their relationship is what inspired a long legacy of TV shows where female friendship is one of, if not the most important theme. Shows like Laverne and Shirley, Sex and the City, and Broad City. In the well-known and loved episode Lucy Does a TV Commercial, Lucy Ricardo wants to prove to her husband Ricky Ricardo that she is a good actress, but he won't give her a chance. So to retaliate, she sneaks onto a commercial set, dismisses the woman who was hired, and takes over her job. Of course, it's immediately funny when she has to pronounce the name of the product, Vitamita Vegemin, which would be hard to say even if you came prepared. As she pitches the health tonic to viewers, she takes sips of it, not realizing one of the main ingredients is grain alcohol. The laughs grow exponentially as she gets more and more drunk, but remains determined to show Ricky she's good at commercials.
The answer to all your problems is in this little old bottle.
According to Stephen Camper's Lucille Ball biography, Ball of Fire, during the episode, even Desi Arnaz himself had to bite the inside of his lip to hold back laughter. Lucille Ball's talent was undeniable, and her husband was more than a little jealous. While the official title of the episode is Job Switching, many folks may remember another iconic I Love Lucy installment as the Candy episode, the one where Lucy Ricardo and Ethel Mertz get jobs working at a candy factory. In an effort to keep up with a conveyor belt carrying chocolates, Lucy begins stuffing them in her mouth. According to the book Ball of Fire, Desi Arnaz found a real-life candy dipper at a local farmer's market to play the guest star in the episode. The woman, Amanda Milligan, plays another factory employee who works alongside Lucy and Ethel. Arnaz's thought was that the experienced candy maker would make an ideal deadpan expression to contrast with Lucy's silliness. When it was time to film the episode, Ball got nervous. According to Ball of Fire, she recalled, "We explained the scene to her a couple of times and she thought we were all crazy. She never cracked a smile once. We began to think, is this funny or isn't it?" In the scene, Milligan is supposed to hit Lucille Ball, but in rehearsal she'd merely tap her. When they finally shot the scene, Ball recalled, "Well, it came time for me to hit her, which I did, and then for her to hit me, which she did. Bam! She gave me such a shot, I thought she had broken my nose." The grape stomping episode is actually called Lucy's Italian Movie. In it, an Italian director wants Lucy to play the role of an American tourist, but she thinks she's supposed to be a grape stomper. Grape stomping was an outdated and unnecessary practice since vineyards now had machines to squish their grapes, but it made for good comedy. According to Ball of Fire, Arnaz managed to find one of the last remaining real grape stompers. He hired her, a woman named Teresa Torelli, to play Lucy's counterpart. Once again, using another non-actor proved to be an interesting experience on set. Teresa didn't speak English and needed a translator to tell her what to do. As Lucille Ball recalled in Ball of Fire, "The time came for us to get in the vat, which was full of real grapes. We started stomping grapes, and I made a dance out of it, and then I slipped. She accidentally hit Teresa, who in turn hit her back." Ball recalled, "She just held me down, hitting me. I thought she was trying to kill me. I had grapes up my nose, up my ears. She was choking me." No one knew Ball was struggling, as they thought it was all part of the show and that Ball would do anything for a laugh. Fred and Ethel Mertz were unabashedly angry and displeased with each other on screen, and that's why audiences loved them. But the actors, Vivian Vance and William Frawley, hated each other in real life, too.
He's no dream, he's a nightmare.
Vance came from Broadway and thought she was better than Frawley, who came from Broadway as well, but spent the majority of his career as a character actor starring in over 100 films. According to The Other Side of Ethel Mertz, the life story of Vivian Vance, Vance said, "How can anyone believe that I'd be married to that old coot?" What Frawley said in response is not safe for primetime television. Frawley had a bad reputation for drinking and being unprofessional, but he was a great actor, so they kept him around. Hedda Hopper, the scariest gossip columnist in Hollywood, was friends with Lucille Ball and was able to keep any unfavorable press about the I Love Lucy cast out of print. Instead of gossip about the feud between the co-stars, the studio wrote press releases that said things like a, quote, four-way admiration society existed between the stars. And they'd even pepper in quotes from Vance about how much she loved Frawley. No one knew for years about the constant bickering behind the scenes. Coming off a successful first season of I Love Lucy in the spring of 1952, Lucille Ball discovered she was being investigated by the House Committee of Un-American Activities. In 1936, Ball had registered as a communist, and that eventually put her on the committee's radar as it worked to eliminate, quote, radical influence from Hollywood via an infamous blacklist. Ball was summoned to testify before Congress. According to the New York Times, Ball explained that she had done it to humor her eccentric socialist grandfather. Ball's mother had also registered as a communist for the same reason, and that she hadn't actually voted in the election. The committee accepted this story and let Lucille Ball go. As the New York Times later wrote, the charges prompted Desi Arnaz to quip, "The only thing red about this girl is her hair, and even that we're not so sure about." I Love Lucy continued airing and gaining in popularity, but the investigation was never quite over. According to the Washington Post, the committee forgave her, but J. Edgar Hoover never forgot. The FBI director continued to collect evidence about Ball. The FBI continued to keep files on Ball and her husband well into the 1950s, because Hoover was never going to let an opportunity to gather dirt on a potential enemy pass him by.
Merry Christmas, everybody!
In 1989, CBS unearthed an old I Love Lucy Christmas special and aired it. The ratings were terrific, prompting a search for other missing episodes that eventually struck gold. In 1951, Desi Arnaz and Lucille Ball shot their own pilot for I Love Lucy at a studio in New York, but it never aired. It was recorded on a kinescope, though, and a copy wound up in an unexpected place. According to a 1990 article in the Washington Post, Desi Arnaz had given a copy of the episode to Pepito, a clown who appeared in the pilot. Years later, Pepito's widow discovered it and passed it on to B. Donald Grant, former head of CBS Entertainment. Through Grant, the original pilot finally found its way to television. CBS aired the special on April 30th, 1990 under the title of I Love Lucy, the very first show. The special was hosted by Lucy Arnaz, Ball and Arnaz's first child, with whom Ball was pregnant when the original pilot was filmed. According to the Associated Press, an estimated 40 million viewers tuned in to watch, making the very first show another ratings hit even decades after I Love Lucy ended. The first pilot never aired because the show was drastically changed after landing Philip Morris as a sponsor. The initial pilot had Arnaz's agent as a main character, which was later cut because, according to Ball biographer Stephen Camper, the plot detracted from the central relationship between Lucy and Desi. So they made Lucy and Desi Ricardo more working class and relatable, and added Fred and Ethel Mertz as their neighbors to make the version of I Love Lucy that we know and love today. In many ways, I Love Lucy was an example of art imitating life. In real life, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz were married. Arnaz was a band leader, and they had a baby the same day Lucy and Ricky Ricardo had a baby. But behind the scenes, the marriage between Ball and Arnaz was tumultuous. According to Ball of Fire, with all of the efforts to create a nuclear family, Lucy spent much of the week alone with the baby, while Desi went to his 38-foot power cruiser Desi Lou and joined the roistering buddies who had been banished from the ranch. Jerry Hausner, who played Ricky's agent in the series, talked about Arnaz to the Washington Post, saying, "He screamed at me and called me names in front of the audience. He was drunk a lot of the time. I went to the producer and said, 'Write me out of this thing.'" Ball had hoped the show would bring their family together, but Arnaz continued to party and engage in affairs. Eventually, the tabloids caught on, and in 1955, a magazine called Confidential ran a story about Arnaz's philandering, in which he was quoted telling a friend that Lucy shouldn't be upset by his affairs because he only dated sex workers and not, quote, other broads. The image of the Ricardos as a great American love story persisted on I Love Lucy, but the relationship between Ball and Arnaz was never a completely happy one. In 1960, when the stress of the show and their marriage had been enough, Lucille Ball filed for a divorce from Desi Arnaz. Arnaz and Ball shared their last kiss on the last episode of the Lucy-Desi Comedy Hour. Ball went on to run Desi Lou, helping produce shows like The Untouchables and Star Trek. While Ball has received a lot of fanfare for being a girl boss, her biggest dream was to be a housewife.
I was delighted to be pregnant. Nothing else mattered.
According to PBS, Ball was fond of dusting her office even while doing interviews to promote Desi Lou in an effort to reinforce a sense of domestic life. It seemed throughout all her success, all she ever wanted was Arnaz and for the family to be together. According to the I Love Lucy book, in the years before the show began, when Ball looked back on her film career, she was quoted as saying, "Of all the 30 or 40 films I had made up to that time, I could only find 3 or 4 scenes in those pictures that I cared anything about. I discovered they were domestic scenes where I portrayed a housewife." It turns out that what Lucille Ball really wanted was to be Lucy Ricardo forever. During the 1950s, Jayne Mansfield captured the imaginations of millions with her stunning good looks, gravity-defying figure, and bubbly personality. But her wild ride came to a terrible end in 1967. This is the tragic real-life story of Jayne Mansfield. Born Vera Jane Palmer in 1933 in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania, to parents Herbert William and Vera Jeffrey Palmer, Jayne Mansfield always knew she wanted to be famous. Teenage Jayne plastered her walls with photos of movie idols and dreamed of stardom. In 1936, a big part of Jayne's world came crashing down when her beloved father died suddenly of a heart attack. Herbert Palmer's passing left a void in Jayne's life. As Raymond Straight, author of The Tragic Secret Life of Jayne Mansfield, explained biography, Jayne grew up always looking for a father and looking to men for a father image, and she never found it. At 16, Vera Jane Palmer, not yet out of high school, eloped with 20-year-old Paul Mansfield. Jayne kept the marriage under wraps and continued to attend high school and live with her mother and stepfather. However, when Jayne became pregnant, the secret came out. In recalling her mother's reaction to her pregnancy, Jayne had this to say to her friend and biographer May Mann. "Mama said I had ruined my life and her life. Then she relented and bought me a pretty white wedding dress and we had a wedding of sorts. But I always remembered her telling me never to expect help from her." On November 9, 1950, Jayne and Paul Mansfield welcomed daughter Jane Marie into the world. However, motherhood would do nothing to diminish Jayne's ambition. After Jayne's high school graduation, the young couple enrolled at Southern Methodist University in Dallas. Like many young newlyweds, Jayne and Paul Mansfield struggled financially. Nevertheless, they juggled parenthood, classes, and work to make a life for themselves and their baby daughter. With her husband away for ROTC summer camp, Jayne left their daughter in the care of her parents while she headed for California to study drama at the University of California, Los Angeles. At the end of the summer session, the Mansfields briefly returned to Texas, but the Korean War necessitated Paul's activation in the Army Reserve and a move to Camp Gordon near Atlanta, Georgia. Jayne's habit of sunbathing and outdoor exercise caused quite a stir among the soldiers and their wives and drove her husband mad with jealousy. Paul Mansfield struck a deal with his wife. If she could wait out his 2-year tour of duty, they would move to Hollywood and make a go of Jayne's dreams. Initially on board with Jayne's aspirations, Paul Mansfield moved his small family to Los Angeles. Soon, however, Paul would come to hate the idea of Jayne becoming a star as her pursuit of her career pushed him further and further into the background of his wife's life. Incredibly intelligent and possessing superhuman ambition, Jayne Mansfield mapped her every career move like a general planning an assault. By the 1950s, the public's conception of ideal womanhood was the voluptuous platinum blonde. Marilyn Monroe set the standard for the mid-century sex symbol, and thousands of would-be starlets followed her lead. With her 40-22-35 figure, Mother Nature had given Jayne Mansfield a leg up, while a bottle of peroxide would do the rest.
Sex appeal is a wonderful, warm, womanly, healthy feeling.
Jayne Mansfield took the concept of the blonde bombshell and turned it up to 11. But even in an era when bigger was always better, her curves proved a bit too dangerous to some. As recounted in a 2003 episode of the BBC documentary series Living Famously, Mansfield's stunning looks had scored her numerous titles, ranging from Miss Photo Flash and Miss Cadillac to Cherry Blossom Queen and Queen of the Palm Springs Desert Rodeo. Yet her physical assets were just a bit too hot for commercial advertising. The official Jayne Mansfield licensing website, JayneMansfield.com, quotes photographer Gary Lester on one of Mansfield's first professional modeling gigs, which was a photo shoot for General Electric. Lester recalled, "General Electric notified me that they had to cut her out of the picture because she looked too sexy for 1954 viewers." Jayne Mansfield's first marriage would not survive her quest for stardom. Just 4 months after arriving in California, Jayne and Paul Mansfield separated. Cracks in their marriage had begun to show during their time at Camp Gordon. According to biographer Raymond Straight, Paul Mansfield had hoped that marriage and motherhood would quell his wife's ambitions. By the time Paul left for Korea, the marriage was effectively over. The marriage collapsed under the strain of emotional and financial struggles brought on by the Mansfields' move to California and Jayne's single-minded pursuit of fame. Alleged infidelities on Jayne's part also took a toll on Paul. Eventually, he gave Jayne an ultimatum. It was him or her career. Soon, he was on his way back to Dallas. Jayne Mansfield's ambitions finally began to bear fruit when she landed her first movie role in the 1955 film noir Female Jungle. That year would also find Mansfield making the first of many appearances in Playboy. Jayne's semi-nude photo spread in the Famous Men's magazine gave Paul Mansfield what he hoped would be ammunition to gain custody of their daughter, citing it as evidence that Jayne was an unfit mother.
But everyone figures me for a sex pot. No one thinks I'm equipped for motherhood.
Jayne Mansfield instinctively understood the value of publicity. She turned to Jim Byron, a former club promoter, to help her with her image. As related in Jayne Mansfield, a biography, Byron managed to get her a meeting with a producer at Warner Brothers. Already familiar with Mansfield's story from thousands of other starry-eyed aspiring actresses, the producer told her she'd be better off settling down as a wife and mother. After taking Mansfield on a tour of the studio lot, the producer told her he'd call her if something came up. Soon after, the studio called Mansfield for a screen test. Within days, she signed a 7-year contract with the studio. At first, it seemed that Jayne Mansfield had at last achieved her dreams of stardom. She relished strolling about the Warner lot in the company of the biggest movie celebrities of the day, and Warner's publicity machine kept her in the public eye. Yet her 7-year contract resulted in little work for Mansfield. Ultimately, Warner Brothers dropped Jayne Mansfield after 4 largely unremarkable films. In July 1955, Mansfield took a starring role in George Axelrod's play Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter? A Broadway smash, the play finally propelled Mansfield to fame. However, 20th Century Fox was so eager to nab the actress that the studio bought the rights to the play and signed Mansfield to a new 6-year contract with a promise to groom her as one of the studio's most important stars. From the beginning of her career to the present day, many critics dismissed Jayne Mansfield as an overblown parody of Marilyn Monroe. The comparisons began with Mansfield's star-making turn in George Axelrod's 1955 comedy Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter? In the play, Mansfield stars as Rita Marlowe, a stereotypical blonde starlet with a breathy voice and a questionable IQ.
Leave and walk out on all this publicity?
Written as a lampoon of Monroe, Rita Marlowe gave Mansfield the opportunity to stretch out in a comedic role. Unfortunately, she would forever be branded as a dumb blonde by detractors who mistook her act for reality. Mansfield, who had an IQ in the 140s, spoke 5 languages, and played violin, piano, and viola, shrewdly crafted her flighty sex bomb persona for maximum impact. Where Monroe came to despise her public image and longed to be considered a serious actress, Mansfield craved attention. So when Monroe was suspended by 20th Century Fox, the studio picked up Jayne Mansfield to fill the shoes of their troubled and increasingly disagreeable star. Citing Monroe's pretensions to art, Mansfield explained her own unique appeal to the Washington Post's Lawrence J. Quirk in a 1957 interview. "I want to strike out on the common trail. I want to be the ordinary man's conception of what a sexy, obliging, comradely, down-to-earth girlfriend ought to be." Jayne Mansfield's move from Broadway to 20th Century Fox at last put her on the road to movie stardom. Her first film at the studio was a Technicolor rock and roll comedy titled The Girl Can't Help It. In the film, Mansfield stars as Jerry Jordan, the tone-deaf girlfriend of a mobster determined to make her a singing star with the help of a hapless, hard-drinking press agent. The film was a huge success and further cemented Mansfield's sexpot image. Mansfield's next film for Fox was a radical departure. Released in 1957, The Wayward Bus, based on a novel by John Steinbeck, found the actress in a rare dramatic role. A modest box office success, the film garnered Mansfield a Golden Globe for New Star of the Year. The same year, Mansfield would star in Kiss Them For Me with Cary Grant and reprise her role as Rita Marlowe in the film adaptation of Will Success Spoil Rock Hunter? A world-famous movie star at last, Mansfield bought a Hollywood mansion, a Jaguar, and a host of other luxuries, all in her signature color, pink. Mansfield's meteoric rise ended with the 1958 release of The Sheriff of Fractured Jaw. As the 1960s dawned, the era of the blonde bombshell was over. Relegated to low-budget foreign B pictures, Mansfield was forced to turn down roles due to her repeated pregnancies. In 1962, Fox ended her contract. Jayne Mansfield pursued romance with nearly the same passion and intensity as she chased fame. Stardom and fame were a volatile mix for Mansfield. Her first marriage to Paul Mansfield, father of her daughter Jane Marie and the man from whom she took her last name, withered in the light of her rising star. Paul's jealousy and reluctance to live his life as Mr. Jayne Mansfield, coupled with his wife's rumored extramarital dalliances, ended their marriage in an acrimonious divorce and custody fight. If Jayne Mansfield had one true love in life other than fame, it was bodybuilder Mickey Hargitay, whom she wooed away from an aging Mae West to marry in 1958. With their flashy style and physical perfection, they perfectly complemented one another. Nevertheless, Jayne embarked on a series of affairs that eventually ended her second marriage.
I think it's very, very bad taste.
What's very bad taste?
Telling your wife you love her in front of me.
Mansfield's third and final marriage to director Matt Cimber ended in divorce in just under 2 years. Jayne Mansfield's final years were stained with tragedy and a struggle to remain relevant. Abandoned by the mainstream film industry, the few movie roles she could get were cheaply made exploitation fare. In 1964, Mansfield married theater director Matt Cimber, who assured her that he could reignite her Hollywood career. The 2-year union resulted in another child, and Mansfield's final starring role in Cimber's film Single Room Furnished. If Jayne Mansfield had begun her career as a parody of Marilyn Monroe, it seemed that she was ending it as a parody of herself. Turning to drugs and alcohol to cope with a life and career that was rapidly careening out of control, Mansfield engaged in a volatile affair with her attorney, Sam Brody. Brody and Mansfield's relationship often devolved into drunken brawls, as recounted by biographer Mae Mann. Diminished to performing in a gaudy traveling nightclub act, Mansfield's career and life were on borrowed time. On the morning of July 29, 1967, Jayne Mansfield, Sam Brody, driver Ronnie Harrison, and 3 of Mansfield's children were en route from Biloxi, Mississippi to New Orleans. Mansfield was scheduled for an appearance on local TV. At around 2 a.m., the party's car collided with the rear of a tractor-trailer. Shrouded in a fog of pesticide, the looming danger was virtually invisible. The 3 adult occupants were killed instantly, though the children survived. One of her children, Mariska Hargitay, would later go on to star in NBC's long-running crime procedural Law & Order Special Victims Unit. Jayne Mansfield was just 34 years old.
These stars of classic films were actually really weird people. If you give certain folks enough money and influence, they'll let their quirks show. Let's dig deeper into some famous Hollywood weirdos. James Stewart may have had a mild-mannered screen persona, but in real life he was a certified tough guy. He flew a bomber over Europe in World War II when he was already famous, doing so spectacularly well that he was awarded with multiple military distinctions. And class act that he was, he even had it written into his Hollywood contracts that his war record could never be used to promote a movie. But perhaps the craziest chapter in his life was when he became an international smuggler. The story gets even weirder when you hear what Stewart was smuggling. He was tasked with transporting the mummified hand of a Yeti from Nepal to the United Kingdom, which he did by hiding it in his wife's lingerie. This was in the 1950s, at a time when it still seemed possible that there was an abominable snowman hiding out in the Himalayas somewhere. A group of Nepalese monks was known to have a supposed Yeti hand in their possession, and Stewart, who was in India at the time, was considered the best person to smuggle it out for testing. As you might suspect, the hand turned out to be fake.
I don't know. I should have known better.
Alec Guinness was one of Britain's biggest screen icons. Classy and understated, he was the quintessential Englishman. At least on screen he was. Off-screen, he was a bizarre control freak who wouldn't let anyone make their own decisions and spent his every waking hour seeking to undermine his long-suffering wife. In his definitive biography on the star, author Piers Paul Reed revealed that nearly every meeting he'd had with Guinness over the years had been remarkably odd. The actor apparently loved to meet for meals where he'd ask everyone at the table what they wanted. The moment they replied, he would declare, "No, you wouldn't like that." And then he would call the waiter over and order them the exact opposite. Guinness' home life was also odd and apparently quite unpleasant. He'd grown up with an absent father and a mother who was a drunken thief, and his hatred of her turned into a kind of reflexive misogyny. As an adult, this expressed itself in open resentment and belittling of his wife, whom he considered stupid. Tippi Hedren is best known for fleeing from flocks in Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds, but in real life she wasn't particularly scared of wild animals, as she shared her Hollywood home with a fully grown 400-pound male lion. This unlikely setup developed from Hedren's conservation work. She's been active in the field of saving big cats for decades and has won hosts of awards for her efforts. Hedren's lion, Neil, had the run of the house and would saunter through the living room when guests were visiting. At the time, the actress was living with her daughter, Melanie Griffith. Every now and then, she'd let Griffith and Neil share a bed, which is exactly as terrible an idea as it sounds. Thankfully, Neil didn't maul Hedren, eat Griffith, or kill any guests. However, they later got other lions, and each family member was attacked at one time or another, including on the set of the 1981 film Roar, which led to Griffith needing 50 stitches on her face. Hedren has since admitted that keeping a lion in her house was, quote, stupid beyond belief.
Teeth that are huge with claws that are so strong, you will never be on an equal with them.
Bette Davis was one of the last screen goddesses, but if you got on her wrong side, she was liable to detonate with the force of 1,000 A-bombs. One time, she and producer William Fry were meeting director Herschel Doherty for a meal when Doherty made the mistake of wagging his finger in Davis's face. As Fry recalls it, Davis unleashed such a tirade that she managed to clear out half the restaurant. Immediately afterwards, she snapped back to being her usual self, as if nothing had happened.
Fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy night.
Legendary as Davis' temper was, her obsessive attention to detail was almost equally notorious. When the film A Stolen Life needed to cast a dog, Davis didn't allow a pet casting director to get involved, as she instead personally auditioned every mutt in Los Angeles. The dog didn't even have a huge role, as it was only in one key scene. According to director Curtis Bernhardt, Davis' efforts were wasted anyway, as the dog was too scared of her to do any canine acting. Greta Garbo was so obsessed with the health benefits of fad diets that she subjected herself to meals that the United Nations would class as biological weapons. The actress was a total recluse who hated venturing out so much, she once managed to miss her own wedding. Just about the only person she allowed into her life was Gaylord Hauser, who just happened to be a nutritionist with a side gig in Crazy. He convinced Garbo to spend decades following his dietary plans. One involved eating nothing but raw yeast with occasional treats of buttermilk. Another involved Garbo dining only on spinach for a full 3 weeks. Luckily, she abandoned that diet before she had to choose between going to the hospital and trading blows with Bluto down at the dockyards. Hauser liked to claim that following his bonkers eating plans would allow anyone to live to the age of 100. In fairness, both he and Garbo actually came close. with Hauser dying at 89 and Garbo at 84. No word, though, as to whether they actually thought their dieting was remotely worth it.
No one conjures up the spirit of classic horror cinema quite like Vincent Price. With his unmistakable voice, diabolical laugh, and imposing presence, this iconic actor has terrified generations of film fans over the years. Here are some essential facts about the man himself.
I never met a monster I didn't like.
I can believe it.
While most kids his age were saving their pennies for bikes or toys, the precocious Vincent Price had his eye on a different prize, an original etching by Rembrandt. The 12-year-old Vincent made a down payment of $5 on the piece, titled Two Nude Models, One Standing, and spent an entire year saving his allowance, working summer jobs, and running errands to earn money to purchase it. After that, Price became hooked on fine art and vowed to become a great art collector. After graduating from Yale in 1933, Price traveled to London to attend the Courtauld Institute of Art, where he intended to pursue a master's degree in fine arts. However, he would be distracted by a newfound love, the theater. Although Price would end up becoming a professional actor rather than an art historian, Price pursued and promoted fine art and art education throughout his life. Noting a lack of opportunity for inner-city students, Price donated a portion of his personal art collection to East Los Angeles College in 1957, leading to the foundation of the Vincent Price Art Museum. In the decades since, the museum has grown to house over 9,000 works of art and 7 galleries. In 1962, the actor partnered with Sears and Roebuck department stores for the Vincent Price collection. Handpicked by Price himself, this collection of original paintings and reproductions brought the finest of art within reach of everyday consumers. Growing up in a wealthy Protestant family in St. Louis, Missouri, the young Vincent Price adopted the conservative and often latently anti-Semitic and anti-Catholic views that were all too common in the first half of the 20th century. These attitudes, combined with his father's admiration for German culture, eventually led Price to express a degree of admiration for Adolf Hitler prior to World War II. In 1999, Price's daughter Victoria told the Florida Sun-Sentinel, "When he went to Germany and Austria as a young man, he was struck by a lot of things going on during the Weimar Republic and the dissolution of the empire. So when Hitler came into power, instead of seeing him as a dangerous force, he was sort of swept up in this whole idea that Hitler was going to bring German pride back." However, Price would come to emphatically renounce these views soon after. Questioning his own beliefs, as well as the politics of his parents, Price became an outspoken enemy of fascism, running with a crowd of noted intellectuals, including such luminaries as Lillian Hellman and Dorothy Parker, helped transform Price into an outspoken advocate for racial and religious equality. In Price's own words, by 1938, he came to his senses and became a rabid Rooseveltian. Nonetheless, his early beliefs were a source of serious embarrassment for the actor, who kept them secret for his entire life. Although his name has become virtually synonymous with the genre, horror movies made up a minority of Vincent Price's work. In fact, fewer than a third of the more than 100 movies he was featured in were horror films. Price began his career in film with the 1938 romantic comedy Service Deluxe. For his second film, Price took on the role of English courtier and explorer Sir Walter Raleigh in 1939's The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex. Throughout the late 30s and 40s, Vincent Price co-starred in a number of historical dramas and literary adaptations. Although he would star in Universal's 1940 sequel, The Invisible Man Returns, replacing Claude Rains in the title role, it wasn't until 1953 that Price appeared in his signature horror role, in the classic flick House of Wax. Even then, Price's reputation as a master of horror didn't crystallize until the 1960s. Even at the height of his horror career, Price made plenty of appearances outside of the genre. Just 3 years after House of Wax, he took on the role of Egyptian master builder Baka in the biblical epic The Ten Commandments. He also lent his voice to several animated films, including his unforgettable turn as the criminal mastermind Ratigan in Disney's 1986 feature The Great Mouse Detective. Vincent Price's appetites extended far beyond art and acting.
Just a tiny bit of white wine.
I want to see if it's fresh first.
Yes, please do. Is it all right?
Are you sure?
Yes, very good.
A gourmet chef and true lover of food, Price and his second wife, Mary Grant, traveled the world collecting and collating recipes. In 1965, the couple published their first cookbook, A Treasury of Great Recipes. Becoming an instant bestseller, the book quickly became a favorite of both professional chefs and home cooks. Despite going out of print, A Treasury of Great Recipes was reissued for its 50th anniversary in 2015, thanks to the efforts of the actor's daughter, Victoria Price. Speaking about her father, Price explained, "He had an omnivorous appetite for life and for food." However, it would be wrong to think of Vincent Price as a food snob. Price's tastes, as reflected in A Treasury of Great Recipes, ran the gamut from rich and complex dishes from the world's finest restaurants to his beloved ballpark hot dogs. Then, in 1971, Price brought his culinary skills to British television with Cooking Pricewise. Produced by Tim's Television, the 6-part series featured Price preparing meals from around the world with a cupboard of easily obtainable ingredients. A companion book of recipes also followed the show's broadcast. Although Vincent Price will be forever remembered by 80s kids for his unforgettable rap and ominous laugh on Michael Jackson's smash hit Thriller, his work on the best-selling album was far from his only foray into music and youth culture. Already beloved by the drive-in set because of his roles in American International's Edgar Allan Poe films, Price made a brief but memorable appearance in the studio's 1963 musical romp Beach Party as Big Daddy, the zen-out owner of a surfer hangout. Price enjoyed his popularity with young fans, and Beach Party greatly increased his visibility among teens. The next decade would find Price voicing the curator on the song The Black Widow from Alice Cooper's 1975 solo record Welcome to My Nightmare. Price is in fine form on the cut, going from amiable museum tour guide to crazed maniac as he expresses his admiration for the deadly spider. Following the album's release, Price appeared in an expanded role in the TV special Alice Cooper The Nightmare as the Spirit of the Nightmare. That same year, Price joined hard rockers Deep Purple as narrator for their rock opera The Butterfly Ball and the Grasshopper's Feast. Deep Purple would pay tribute to the late horror star in 2013 with their single Vincent Price. Other bands to honor Price in song include punk pioneers The Misfits with 1978's Return of the Fly, and ZZ Top with Vincent Price Blues from their 1996 album Rhythmine. Strangely enough, the role Vincent Price considered his greatest triumph wasn't in the horror genre. It wasn't even in a film. No, it seems that Price was on stage for his finest hour. By the late 1970s, Price, still a highly visible presence with guest roles on TV, commercials, and in horror films, had grown restless. Although he was as popular as ever, he felt his standing as an actor had declined. So, in 1976, Price landed the role that would truly demonstrate his ability as an actor. Diversions and Delights, written by screenwriter John Gay, presented Price with the greatest challenge of his career. A one-man show, the play is built on the premise that a destitute Oscar Wilde, fresh from prison, has taken on the task of lecturing to make some quick cash. Price was at first reluctant to undertake a role as complex as that of Wilde, but his third wife, actress Coral Brown, knew he was the man for the job, and with her encouragement, he took the role. The production premiered in San Francisco in 1977 to rave reviews from both audiences and the press. Channeling Wilde's famous flamboyance, Price inhabited the role totally, bringing both humor and pathos to the production. Following a successful run in San Francisco, Price took the show on the road with successful and often held overruns in major cities across the world, winning plenty of praise and hordes of new fans along the way. Vincent Price had a fondness for Native American art and culture that transcended his interest as a collector of artifacts. Price's love of Native art, combined with his star power, made him a powerful ally to the Native arts community, leading to his appointment to the Department of the Interior's Indian Arts and Crafts Board in 1957. Eventually serving as the chairman of the 5-member council, Price was charged with the operation of 2 museums dedicated to Native American art, and aided in developing policies to promote the economic welfare of Native peoples through traditional arts and crafts. In a 2014 interview conducted by the Santa Fe Reporter, Ryan Flahive, archivist at the Institute of American Indian Arts, explained how Price's advocacy and support continue to influence Native art and education. Flahive explained, "He was known as an art connoisseur for most of his life. He was also a very outspoken critic of federal policy concerning minorities, Native people in particular. The horror star was particularly taken with the IAIA's talented writing students. On his first visit to the school located in Santa Fe, New Mexico, he established the Vincent Price Awards in Creative Writing, a stipend for students of prose and poetry. Playhive says, "In my mind, the awards set a precedent and foundation for the strong creative writing program at IAIA. I'm not sure creative writing would have been as successful at IAIA without Price's early support." Rumors regarding Vincent Price's sexuality have run rampant for decades. In a 2015 interview with Boom, Price's daughter Victoria confirmed what many have intuited about her father. She said, "I am as close to certain as I can be that my dad had physically intimate relationships with men. I know for 100% fact that my dad was completely loving and supportive of LGBT people." When Victoria Price came out to her father, he compassionately responded with support and empathy, telling her, "You know, I know just how you feel, because I have had these deep, loving relationships with men in my life, and all my wives were jealous." Vincent Price's earliest public support of the LGBTQ community came in the 1970s, when he publicly denounced singer Anita Bryant's notorious anti-gay crusade. While touring with Diversions and Delights, the actor quipped that Wilde had already written a play about her, a woman of no importance. Price also served as an honorary board member of the LGBTQ advocacy organization PFLAG, and was one of the first celebrities to appear in public service announcements to help alleviate public fears about AIDS. Vincent Price's daughter, Mary Victoria Price, was born on April 27, 1962. The child of Price and his second wife, costume designer Mary Grant, Victoria Price is a noted designer, author, educator, and inspirational speaker. In 1999, she wrote the definitive biography of her father, Vincent Price, A Daughter's Biography. Facing a period of personal crisis, Price abandoned her former life to pursue a path of spiritual growth. In 2016, she entered a period of intentional homelessness, during which she traversed the country gathering material for her inspirational book, The Way of Being Lost, A Road Trip to My Truest Self. Price maintains her father's legacy through the official Vincent Price website and has been instrumental in the reissuing of her father's writing, including the cookbooks he co-wrote with Mary Grant. A favorite on the horror convention circuit, Victoria Price is, ironically, not a fan of horror movies, but is a self-proclaimed fan of horror fans.
Bewitched ran from 1964 to 1972 and followed the adventures of a young witch named Samantha, who can work wonders with a simple twitch of her nose. From the infamous nude Darren to an ill-fated feature film starring Will Ferrell, this is the untold truth of Bewitched. The idea for Bewitched didn't appear to screenwriter Saul Sachs in a puff of smoke, nor did he use a magic spell to cook it up. Rather, Sachs was inspired to create the sitcom after watching I Married a Witch, a quirky rom-com shot during the golden age of Hollywood. As stated on Turner Classic Movies, I Married a Witch was adapted from a 1941 Thorne Smith novel called The Passionate Witch. The 1942 picture tells the story of a woman named Jennifer who just so happens to be a witch living in 1600s New England. When Jennifer is burned at the stake in Salem, she vows to get revenge on those who ordered her execution. Centuries later, her spirit is accidentally set free and she is able to roam the earth once more. She develops an interest in a local politician, but things get complicated when she realizes that her perfect man is a descendant of those who had her killed. Ultimately, the power of romance overcomes their differences. Iconic Hollywood starlet Veronica Lake played Jennifer, while Academy Award winner Frederick March played her lover and all his ancestors. Bewitched fans loved the chemistry and camaraderie between Elizabeth Montgomery's character Samantha and her on-screen husband Darren. In real life, Montgomery had a husband she was just as wild about, William Bill Asher, one of the show's producers. Montgomery met Asher on the set of the 1963 TV movie Johnny Cool, which she starred in and he directed.
Johnny, I need you. I need you right now.
As detailed in Herbie J. Pilato's biography, Twitch Upon a Star, The Bewitched Life and Career of Elizabeth Montgomery, Asher and Montgomery were attracted to each other at the time, but neither of them were emotionally available, having just come out of separations with other celebrities. By the time Screen Gems executives William Dozier and Harry Ackerman started working on Bewitched, Asher and Montgomery had spent more time together and were a happy couple. Dozier was a friend of Montgomery's and had been wanting to collaborate with her for some time. After New York actress Tammy Grimes turned down the part for Samantha, Dozier offered the part to Montgomery and she gladly accepted. Asher joined the show as a director. Eventually, he would take the reins in a full-time producing role. Elizabeth Montgomery was pregnant 3 times over the course of Bewitched. Throughout much of the first season, she was expecting her first son with Bill Asher, William. However, because her character was so recently married, the producers opted to disguise her pregnancy with carefully chosen clothing and camera angles. By the time she was expecting second son Robert, characters Samantha and Darren had already been married for a while. Instead of recommending the show's previous approach, the network censors allowed the Bewitched writers to weave Montgomery's pregnancy into the script.
You're what? I'm gonna have a baby.
Thus, when Robert was born, so was Tabitha, the first Stevens baby. During season 6 of the show, Montgomery became pregnant again, this time with third child Rebecca. Once again, the Bewitched team decided to write the new baby into the sitcom. Samantha and Darren's second child was a boy named Adam, who would eventually become a warlock. When most people think of the Tabitha character, actress Erin Murphy comes to mind. However, the role of Samantha and Darren's daughter was actually filled by 7 different children over the course of the show's run. First was Cynthia Black, who was only 2.5 weeks old when she appeared in the episode, and then there were 3, which depicts Tabitha's birth. Next up was a set of twins, Heidi and Laura Gentry, who took turns portraying the baby witch in the episode My Baby the Tycoon. The Gentry girls were shortly replaced with another set of twins, Tamar and Julie Young, who played Tabitha for the rest of season 2. Season 3, which showed Tabitha growing up, featured older twins Erin and Diane Murphy in the role. When the differences between the girls became apparent, Erin, who looks more like Elizabeth Montgomery, took over full-time. Her sister Diane wasn't left in the dust. She was brought in for various guest roles, such as a girl who gets punched in the stomach and a bunny for Tabitha, and a human version of Raggedy Ann and Samantha and the Troll. Many devoted fans of Bewitched were upset when Dick Sargent replaced Dick York as Samantha's husband Darren in season 6. It turns out that Agnes Moorehead, who played Endora, might not have been so pleased with the decision to recast him either. As detailed in Herbie J. Pilato's Twitch Upon a Star, there was often an uncomfortable dynamic between the two on the set. David White, who played Darren's boss Larry Tate on the show, recalls that at the first table read with Sargent as Darren, Moorehead rose from her seat and announced, quote, "I'm not fond of change." Later, when the cast flew to Salem, Massachusetts for an on-location shoot, White saw Sargent crying. Sargent explained that he had been hurt by something Moorehead had said. However, the actors did ultimately reconcile. In a 1992 interview, Sargent told author Owen Keenan, "She was certainly the most professional woman in the world, and she was so good an actress. Thank God we became friends eventually." Bewitched is primarily known for its humorous riffs on gender dynamics. However, the show, which aired during the Civil Rights era, also discussed racism in an episode called Sisters at Heart, thanks in large part to a woman named Marcella Saunders. In 1969, Saunders was an English teacher working at Thomas Jefferson High School in Los Angeles. Hoping to get her students interested in writing by creating a connection to television, Saunders reached out to several popular shows, including Bewitched. Elizabeth Montgomery and William Asher wrote back to her, inviting her students to the set of the show. After the exciting field trip, the students wrote a sample storyline for the sitcom and sent it to the Bewitched team as a thank you. The plot revolved around an interracial friendship between Tabitha and a black classmate of hers. Staff writer Barbara Avedon felt so strongly about the concept that she turned it into a real episode, the show's 1970 Christmas special.
Tonight's show was created in the true spirit of Christmas. The story was written by the 10th grade English class at Thomas Jefferson High School in Los Angeles.
In Sisters at Heart, Tabitha is friends with a black girl named Lisa, whom she refers to as her sister. When a high-profile client of Darren's comes to the house and sees the girls playing together, he assumes that Darren is married to a black woman and stops doing business with him out of prejudice. After being called out by Larry, Darren's boss, the businessman comes to recognize the error of his ways and apologizes for his racism. Bewitched is famous for its cartoon intro, created by Hanna-Barbera Productions. Every fan of the series can instantly recognize the iconic sequence, which depicts Samantha flying over the city on a broomstick, turning her hat into a frying pan, transforming into a cat, and finally jumping into the arms of Darren. However, even some diehards may be surprised to learn that the Bewitched characters also made 2 other animated appearances. Samantha and Darren's highest-profile adventure in the cartoon world took place in 1965, when Elizabeth Montgomery and Dick York guest-starred on a special crossover episode of The Flintstones. The episode, appropriately titled Samantha, shows the Stevenses moving to Bedrock and befriending Fred, Wilma, Betty, and Barney. Like many Bewitched plots, the story deals with gender stereotypes and conventions. When Fred and Barney go on a camping trip for the boys, Samantha sets up camp with Betty and Wilma to prove that they can handle the wilderness just as well. 7 years later, the Stevens children got their own animated special with Tabitha and Adam and the Clown Family. According to Jeff Langburn's Encyclopedia of Animated Cartoons, this hour-long program, part of ABC's Saturday Superstar movie program, followed Tabitha and Adam as they visited an aunt who works with the circus. Many viewers of Bewitched were enamored by Tabitha, Samantha and Darren's mischievous daughter. In 1977, 5 years after the sitcom's final episode, ABC decided to give audiences more of the fan favorite by creating Tabitha, a spin-off starring a grown-up version of the character. According to IMDb, the series followed the adventures of Tabitha and her brother Adam as they worked at Los Angeles television station KXLA. As in the original series, Tabitha was a witch who sometimes employed her magic powers to get herself out of predicaments. Adam, who was a warlock in the Bewitched universe, was rewritten to be immortal so that he could fulfill the role of the rational cynic, much as Darren did initially. Other recurring characters included Aunt Minerva, who encouraged Tabitha to use her witchcraft more often, and Paul Thurston, a TV host who acted as Tabitha's on-again, off-again love interest. Aaron Murphy, who played the original Tabitha, was just 12 when the spin-off went into production. Therefore, the network had to find a new star. They ultimately landed on 21-year-old Lisa Hartman, who would later become a musician.
Don't you recognize me, Doctor? I'm Tabitha Stevens.
Oh, yes, of course. Samantha's daughter.
David Ankrum played the role of her brother, while Karen Morrow and Robert Urich stepped into Minerva's and Paul's shoes. Bewitched made it to the big screen decades after its run in 2005, when it was made into a feature film by famous rom-com director Nora Ephron. The film puts a meta spin on the original sitcom. It tells the story of an actual modern-day witch who auditions for the part of Samantha in a Bewitched remake and uses her powers to make her co-star fall in love with her.
It's Bewitched. The TV show? We're redoing it.
Nicole Kidman plays Isabel Bigelow, the Samantha actress, while Will Ferrell plays Jack Wyatt, the Darren actor.
Oh, she doesn't need her car, she has her broomstick.
Shirley MacLaine, Sir Michael Caine, Jason Schwartzman, and Kristen Chenoweth all had starring roles as well. Not everyone was a fan of the Bewitched movie, though. The film currently has a 24% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and the New York Times called it, quote, an unmitigated disaster. However, Kidman and Ferrell received high praise for their performances. Australian film critic Margaret Pomeranz said Kidman, quote, captures the sweet naivete of Isabel well, and called Ferrell, quote, really impressive in a part that is really demanding. Meanwhile, iconic film critic Roger Ebert referred to the duo as, quote, funny and likable. In retrospect, it's impressive how far Bewitched's influence has reached. The sitcom was so critically acclaimed and well-received that it spawned remakes around the world, in countries as far as Japan and Russia. According to IMDb, the Japanese version of Bewitched was aired in 2004, 50 years after the original gained popularity. There, the Japanese title was translated to My Wife is a Witch. It was also called Bewitched in Tokyo. The Russian version of Bewitched, which had the title My Favorite Witch, was broadcast in 2009. According to the official website of Russian network TV3, this adaptation reimagined Samantha as Nadia Stoletova, the great-great-granddaughter of a Baba Yaga, a fearsome type of witch in the Russian folklore tradition.
Everyone knows that most Hitchcock films are stone-cold classics, many of which are among the craziest, scariest, and darkest movies out there. But maybe that's not surprising, considering the man was pretty crazy, scary, and dark himself. Here are a few of the strangest things to have happened on the sets of Hitchcock's movies. Even among Hitchcock's many classic films, The Birds has got to be one of the most famous. But it was only in 2016 that leading lady Tippi Hedren's memoir gave the public a look into just what went on behind the scenes. For her, she wrote, making the movie was nothing short of a nightmare. The Birds was Hedren's first movie job, and she'd been offered it after Hitchcock had seen her in a commercial where she didn't even have a single line. She made an impression, though, and he ordered Universal to find her so he could offer her a contract along with a pin made from gold and pearls showing a pair of birds in flight, which seems a little creepy, sure, but that's not the half of it.
He'd be standing off, talking to people, carrying on a conversation, and staring at me.
According to Hedren, it wasn't long after shooting started that Hitchcock came to the conclusion she was losing weight. So he did what any other obsessed fanboy would do. He sent her a basket of bread with a note that read, "Eat me." If that weren't enough, Hedren said that his hugging and touching got to the point where she finally approached his wife Alma and asked her to make it all stop. According to Hedren, Alma just walked away. After The Birds, Hedren was cast as the title character in Marnie. She says that things only got worse from there, with Hitchcock regularly grabbing her, telling her about his dreams in which she professed her undying love for him, and his promise to ruin her if she rejected him. She wrote, "It was sexual, it was perverse, and it was ugly, and I couldn't have been more shocked or repulsed." Writing about how she felt after shooting Marnie, Hedren wrote, "My soul needed to get away." Today, you can watch pretty much any movie safe in the knowledge that any animals shown on screen would have been humanely treated behind the scenes. Sadly, that's not always the case, and it certainly wasn't the case in the 60s either. Heck, back then they didn't even treat the humans right. By the time they were ready to film that iconic scene in the attic during production on The Birds, Tippi Hedren had already made it perfectly clear what she thought of Hitchcock's obsession with her. According to Hedren, that week-long shoot was one of the most traumatic experiences she ever had. Originally, Originally, it didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary, and she'd been told that they were going to use mechanical birds for the scene, but that was a lie. Hedren wrote, "Everybody lied to me, and on the Monday morning, as we were going to start the scene, the assistant director came in and looked at the floor and the walls and the ceiling, then blurted out, 'The mechanical birds don't work, so we have to use real ones,' and then he ran out. When she got on set, she realized there apparently hadn't been any intention of using mechanical birds whatsoever, and that the entire attic was rigged so bird handlers could stand safely off camera and spend the next week throwing actual gulls, pigeons, and ravens at her. At one point, they tied a raven to her leg, and the understandably freaked out bird clawed her face in a frantic attempt to get away. The ordeal only ended when the bruised and bloody Hedren collapsed, after which she was taken into a doctor's care. Of her experiences with the director, Hedren wrote, "I got over Hitchcock a long time ago because I wasn't going to allow my life to be ruined because of it. It was like I was in a mental prison, but now it has no effect on me. I did what I had to do to deal with it." Decades after its 1959 release, North by Northwest is still hailed as one of the best spy films of all time.
What possessed you to come blundering in here like this? Could it be an overpowering interest in art?
Yes, the art of survival.
It's also notable for being the very first film shot on location at the United Nations building in New York City. Kind of. It's probably not surprising that filming a movie at the UN wasn't entirely approved of at the time. But if there's one thing to know about Hitchcock, it's that he's not the type to let little things like rules and regulations get in the way of bringing his vision to the screen. Even though filming the UN building was strictly off limits, Hitchcock set up a hidden camera to get around UN security and the NYPD in order to film a shot of Cary Grant heading into the building. Filming inside the UN was right out of the question, of course, and getting a shot set up inside would have been impossible even with a hidden camera. In the end, the interior shots were done on a set, but it was a pretty authentic set for one crucial reason. Hitchcock might not have been able to film in the UN lobby, but he was able to put on his tourist disguise, recruit a photographer, and wander through the lobby taking pictures as though he were on vacation. The UN wasn't the only iconic set in North by Northwest, and it wasn't the only one that had Hitchcock scrapping with government officials either. The movie is also famous for its scenes on Mount Rushmore, but getting the permissions needed to film there meant going head-to-head with the U.S. Department of the Interior. According to Hitchcock himself, in North by Northwest during the scene on Mount Rushmore, I wanted Cary Grant to hide in Lincoln's nostril and then have a fit of sneezing. The Parks Commission of the Department of the Interior was rather upset at this thought. I argued until one of their number asked me how I would like it if they had Lincoln play the scene in Cary Grant's nose. I saw their point at once. He had liked the idea so much that the original title for the film had been The Man in Lincoln's Nose, and even though he gave up on that as the ending to the film, he was still hampered by the Park Service's insistence that filming actors running along the president's heads would be disrespectful. Finally, they agreed to allow filming to take place there as long as the utmost respect was to be shown to the monument itself. Hitchcock agreed, and the permits were signed, presumably while the director had his fingers crossed behind his back. While only 3 scenes were actually filmed on site and the rest were filmed on a Hollywood recreation of the iconic monument, the fake Mount Rushmore was so believable that the Park Service got all worked up anyway. And it didn't help that press from MGM had suggested that there was no fake version in the first place. They took the issue all the way to the Senate, but the movie was released before it could be stopped by the government. In the end, while the Park Service didn't manage to stop the release of the movie, they did force Hitchcock to remove a line in the credits saying they had approved the whole thing. One thing that can definitely be said for Hitchcock is that he was an absolute stickler for the little details, but nothing quite matched what he put his crew through in order to recreate a Vermont autumn for The Trouble with Harry. The idea was to film on location in a series of small towns in Vermont, but as anyone who's been to New England knows, the weather there can be unpredictable and autumn doesn't last for long. The weather became unworkable long before filming wrapped on The Trouble with Harry, so Hitchcock made a decision. By the time filming had come to an end, around half the movie had been shot on a California soundstage. In order to keep the look and feel of New England, however, the crew collected bags and bags of autumn leaves in Vermont, sent them to California, and glued them to the trees on their studio set. Just remember that the next time you think your job is monotonous. In 1935, Madeline Carroll and Robert Donat starred in Hitchcock's The 39 Steps, considered to be the film that propelled the director to stardom. He was already 18 movies into his career at that point, however, and that was enough for him to already have propelled his own behavior from merely quirky into downright bizarre. There's a long list of strange behaviors performed by Hitchcock on the set of that movie. Whenever he finished a cup of tea, for example, he'd toss it over his shoulder and smash the cup on the ground. He also reportedly called his stars Mr. Donut and the Birmingham Tart rather than referring to them by their actual names. The first day Donat and Carroll were on set at the same time, he produced the handcuffs that would be keeping them side by side for a good part of the film. Slapping the cuffs on them, he went on to pretend that he'd misplaced the key.
There are 20 million women in this island, and I've got to be chained to you.
There are a few different versions of how that particular story ended. According to Donat, he and Carroll got along too well for Hitchcock to be amused by their suffering, and the director claimed he had found the key after an hour or so. Other accounts have the gag dragging on for many hours, with everyone involved getting more and more annoyed with the whole thing. Except, of course, for Hitchcock himself, who would later remark, "We had a lot of fun making the 39 Steps." Ask anyone to name the most iconic scenes in movie history, and the shower scene from Psycho is guaranteed to be among them. In fact, it's so iconic it's even been given a nickname, 7852, in reference to the 78 setups and 52 cuts that were required to film the scene. But the grueling shooting schedule was actually one of the least strange things about the making of that unforgettable scene. Apparently, Hitchcock wanted to get the sound effects for the stabbing 100% correct, so he sent the prop guy for a watermelon. Since the prop guy had been around long enough to know where this was going, he brought back a bunch of different melons, and auditions were held to see which one made the best sound when it was stabbed. Hitchcock closed his eyes, melons were stabbed, and he eventually decided not on a watermelon after all, but a cassava, and thus, a killing was born. Growing up as the child of someone famous has to be pretty weird, but growing up the child of Alfred Hitchcock? That's another story entirely. In 1951, Alfred's daughter, Patricia Hitchcock, made an appearance in Strangers on a Train, and she definitely didn't get any special treatment from her father while on set. Part of the set was a giant Ferris wheel, and, as luck would have it, Patricia hated heights. So Hitchcock promised her $100 if she would go for a ride, and she did. Unfortunately, the idea of his cherished daughter being helpless on a Ferris wheel was apparently irresistible to the director, so he waited until she was at the very top, cut the lights and the power, and left her there for an hour. And he didn't even give her the $100 after. The Guardian's interview with Pat Hitchcock many years later suggests that she hadn't been terrified in the least at the time, and that she was actually kind of used to things like that happening. That said, even though she claimed that she wasn't scared by the trick, she also said that the question of whether or not his pranks had ever made her cry was the strangest thing I've been asked. I don't delve into myself over much. And that's life in the Hitchcock household.
Christmas movies are usually supposed to be a time to gather the family together to enjoy a warm, happy hour or so in front of the TV. But most people forget that holiday films usually have some pretty messed up moments, starting with 1954's White Christmas. For most people, White Christmas is nearly ruined by the fact that a portion of the movie is spent whining about missing minstrel shows, which are, in fact, blatantly racist performances from the past. That's so messed up that people often forget the second most jarring portion of the film. White Christmas is a movie that gets a whole lot done. 2 romances, a plot about military men returning to civilian life, and 2 performances of the best-selling song of all time. And yet, it still makes time for Danny Kaye to complain, in song, for 3 full minutes about all the infuriating modern dance trends that were threatening to ruin theater in 1954. Scandal. It comes out of nowhere, with Kaye leading a troupe of dancers through a parody of these newfangled beatnik ideas, complaining about how the chicks who did kicks aren't kicking anymore. It's a whole portion of the film dedicated to the idea that things should never change. Of all the non-racist portions of the film, that one's pretty much the weirdest. Elf is a delightful film due to Will Ferrell's performance as Buddy, a human raised by Santa's elves and who maintains a childlike obsession with all things Christmas. That's what drives him to decorate a whole floor of a department store overnight. But it's also easy to forget that Buddy is a full-grown man with urges he acts on in alarming ways. Buddy's little crime is actually presented as just another way he loves Christmas culture. He's got a major crush on department store elf Jovi, so he sneaks into the women's showers at work to listen to her sing Baby It's Cold Outside. Before long, he joins in a questionable bathroom duet, rightfully freaking out Jovi. And Buddy seems mystified as to why she's so mad. He knows what showers are, so whether or not he hit the showers to sneak a peek, it's still extremely jarring that a 6'3" man would sneak into a woman's shower, Arrested Development or not. About 90% of the Santa Claus is about Tim Allen discovering the real meaning of Christmas by slowly transforming into the actual Santa Claus and witnessing pure close-up holiday magic. But it starts out with some of the darkest Christmas movie stuff around. First, there's a scene where divorced workaholic dad Scott takes his son out to a holiday meal at a stark little Denny's that's populated by other divorced dads and their kids. But then the real holiday tragedy kicks in. Scott becomes Santa because he startles the real Santa on his roof, causing old St. Nick to slip and fall to a grisly death. Scott puts on the suit and becomes Santa for at least 3 whole Santa Claus movies worth of time. This is really saying something about the Santa Claus mythology. This changing of the guard suggests that Santa is not one immortal person, but rather a title held by a succession of regular individuals. Sure, there may be an audition process when one Santa gets bored and wants to retire, but there's a very real clause that says an individual can become Santa by straight up murdering the previous Santa. It might just be a chain of endless homicides stretching back for who knows how long. We won't even get into what might have happened to the previous Mrs. Claus either. There are few things worse in the life of a child than the death of a parent, but one of them is definitely the death of a parent on Christmas. Way too sad to be the premise of an entire movie, right? Wrong. In 1998, Michael Keaton played one such dead dad in Jack Frost. But good news, it's a wacky family fantasy movie because he returns to life as a magical talking snowman. Keaton's character is a guy literally named Jack Frost, as in the mythical character that personifies winter, except this Jack is a middle-aged musician who fronts a bluesy bar band who chooses a career over his family. In the holiday spirit, that choice results in a fatal car accident in the middle of a snowstorm while trying to get home to his family for Christmas. Happy holidays, everybody. 1974's A Year Without a Santa Claus is the second best stop-motion animated Christmas special ever made by Rankin Bass Productions. But it's also pretty bleak. It first aired on American television during the year President Richard Nixon resigned, and while the Vietnam War still dragged on. The cynicism felt by millions of Americans shows in A Year Without a Santa Claus. The story begins with a bedridden Santa who's literally worried himself sick with the notion that nobody cares if he exists. The sad sack with the toy sack decides to sit out Christmas this year, while Mrs. Claus sends out some elves to find some true believers. They set out on their journey with reindeer Vixen, who gets shot down in the crossfire from the weather-controlling Snow Miser and Heat Miser, the latter of whom is a demonic presence who lives in a fiery land that sure looks a lot like hell. Yes, it all ends well and Santa gets better, but that's after a sour tone was set with depression, illness, violence, and literal hellspawn. Based on the beloved picture book by Chris Van Allsburg, The Polar Express takes viewers and the main character, oddly called Hero Boy in the film's credits, on a magical CGI Christmas journey. Hero Boy doubts Santa is real, only to be awakened on Christmas Eve by a massive steam train outside his front door. The conductor, a motion-captured Tom Hanks, announces that this vehicle is bound for the North Pole. Based on this flimsy premise, Hero Boy readily boards in the middle of the night, without telling anyone. Merry Christmas, Hero Mom and Hero Dad. Your gift this year is a missing persons case. It's difficult to imagine being alive today and not being familiar with the story laid out by Johnny Marks in his original song, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. But just in case, here you go. Rudolph is a reindeer born with a red nose so shiny that some would even say it glows like a light bulb. This got him made fun of as a child, but once his nose beam proved to be capable of lighting the way for Santa Claus on a particularly foggy Christmas Eve, he was lauded by his former tormentors and went down in history, like Napoleon or toothpaste, depending on where you went to elementary school. But here's the problem. Before his differences proved to be valuable to them personally, the other reindeer hated him so much they wouldn't even let him play games. If red noses weren't good fog lights, Rudolph would have been an outcast to his dying day. Happy holidays. A Charlie Brown Christmas is considered one of television's most beloved holiday traditions, and it's easy to see why. Charlie Brown grappling with wintry depression is something that many viewers can relate to, and the way he tries to find the true meaning of peace on earth and goodwill toward men, even while everyone around him is diving into commercialism, has a sincerity that makes it relevant even after 50 years. Plus, it's got one of the best Christmas movie soundtracks ever recorded. But while everyone loves to gather around the television and watch Charlie Brown grappling with an anxiety disorder, there's one pretty messed up part that nobody ever seems to mention. And surprisingly, it's not the part where a 6-year-old fixes everything by explaining the birth of Christ. No, the problem comes from that poor, pathetic Christmas tree.
What kind of a tree is that? You are supposed to get a good tree. Can't you even tell a good tree from a poor tree?
It's not the tree itself. You couldn't ask for a better metaphor for the story of Jesus. And yet, when the Peanuts gang finally does come to appreciate the tree, it seems like they completely miss the metaphor. Charlie Brown's been searching for the meaning of Christmas, and in that scrawny little tree, he finds it. It doesn't look like much, and it's not as flashy as the artificial trees the other kids want, but it's real, and there's a thoughtfulness and hope invested in it. If this humble tree can be loved, maybe Charlie Brown can too. It turns out he can't. Rather than accepting the tree despite its flaws, the other kids pretty it up into a small but otherwise standard issue Christmas tree, covered in shiny garlands and bright lights, only learning to like it once it looks like everything else. In other words, they took the perfect metaphor for the true meaning of Christmas and made it more commercial.
Good grief.
These classic movie stars were some of the biggest names in Hollywood. When the cameras stopped rolling for good, these are the places where they were finally laid to rest. Much like Marilyn Monroe and Audrey Hepburn, James Dean's face can be found plastered on all kinds of memorabilia from Hollywood's golden age. Unlike Hepburn and Monroe, however, Dean only filmed 3 feature films before his untimely death at 24. Dean was born in 1931 in Marion, Indiana, yet spent his teenage years bouncing between California and his hometown. He stayed in the Golden State to major in theater at the University of California, Los Angeles, but by 1951, he was off to New York. After appearing on Broadway's The Immoralist in 1954, he snagged a screen test at Warner Brothers for East of Eden, a role that catapulted him into Hollywood. While James Dean will forever be remembered for his leading role in Rebel Without a Cause, sadly, he never got a chance to see it, or his final movie, Giant, released. On September 30th, 1955, the actor got into a fatal car crash with his Porsche 550 Spider. His remains are buried in Fairmount Park Cemetery in Grant County, Indiana. It's hard to find someone who can't recognize the melodic crooning of old Blue Eyes himself, Frank Sinatra. The New Jersey-born singer was also loved by the silver screen, having acted in some Hollywood classics such as High Society alongside fellow musical legend Bing Crosby. When Sinatra's music career began to falter in the early 50s, acting was his saving grace and ultimately garnered him the attention he needed to make a comeback. He received an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for his role in 1953's From Here to Eternity, and 2 years later, he was nominated for the Best Actor in a Leading Role category for his turn in The Man with the Golden Arm. On May 14, 1998, Frank Sinatra died at the age of 82. He was buried in the Desert Memorial Park close to Palm Springs, California. According to Time, he went to the great beyond with a bottle of Jack Daniels and a pack of Camel cigarettes tucked into his suit. Marilyn Monroe needs no introduction. The woman born Norma Jean Mortensen is one of the world's most legendary sex symbols and an immensely successful movie star whose movies grossed hundreds of millions of dollars. Discovered by a photographer, Monroe began her career as a model in the 1940s. She later dyed her hair her signature blonde, changed her name to her now iconic moniker, and signed her first movie contract in 1946.
What's the big day tomorrow?
Tomorrow I'm on television.
By the end of the 50s, Monroe was a box office hit, having starred in classics such as 1953's Gentlemen Prefer Blondes and 1959's Some Like It Hot. However, just because stars shine bright in Tinseltown doesn't mean they can't burn out just as fast. Just as the 60s rolled around, Monroe was struggling in her personal life, and her box office draw was floundering. In 1962, Marilyn Monroe died of a drug overdose at just 36. Monroe is buried in Los Angeles, California, in the Westwood Village Memorial Cemetery. Her ex-husband, Joe DiMaggio, organized the funeral, and 3 times a week for 20 years after her untimely death, the baseball legend had red roses delivered to her simple grave. In 1992, the late Hugh Hefner, who had Monroe as Playboy's first playmate, bought a tomb next to the actor so that he could spend eternity beside her.
No. He's looking at you, kid.
It's hard to think of Humphrey Bogart without remembering his iconic performance in 1942's Casablanca. But as one of the biggest movie stars of his time, he brought his inimitable presence to dozens of other projects throughout his career. The actor, who started off as a Broadway star in the 20s, became one of Hollywood's leading men in the 1940s, with hits such as The Maltese Falcon and To Have and Have Not. As Bogey himself once claimed, there was a period in American history when you couldn't pick up a magazine without seeing my kisser in it. Diagnosed with esophageal cancer in 1956, Humphrey Bogart died the following year, on January 14, 1957. In a nod to Have and Have Not, his wife and co-star Lauren Bacall placed a gold whistle with the inscription, "If you want anything, just whistle," with his cremated remains in an urn.
You know how to whistle, don't you, Steve? You just put your lips together and blow.
The actor's final resting place is in a secluded garden in Glendale, California's Forest Lawn Memorial Park. One of the most enduring stars of the golden age of Hollywood, Elizabeth Taylor had a whopping 79 credits to her name at the time of her death in 2011. Unlike some of her peers, Taylor was notorious for remaining true to who she was throughout her career, refusing to pluck her eyebrows or dye her jet black hair. 1963's Cleopatra is, by far, Liz Taylor's most memorable role. On the set of that movie, she met Richard Burton, whom she married for a decade, divorced, then married again only to split less than a year later. And just as popular as she was on camera, Taylor and Burton's relationship also made headlines for their rollicking, hard-drinking lifestyles. When Taylor died on March 23, 2011, of congestive heart failure, she was buried at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. As her son Michael told ABC News, her legacy will never fade. Elegant and doe-eyed Audrey Hepburn will forever be remembered as Holly Golightly, the flighty lead in Hollywood's 1961 movie adaptation of Truman Capote's novella, Breakfast at Tiffany's. Her delicate looks and soft-spoken demeanor were refreshing in Hollywood at the time, with Humphrey Bogart once declaring of her, "You take the Marilyn Monroes and the Terry Moores, and you know just what you're going to get every time." With Audrey, it's kind of unpredictable. Born in Brussels and growing up in Nazi-occupied Holland, Hepburn left for England in her teens and eventually made it all the way to Broadway. By 1953, she starred in Roman Holiday alongside Gregory Peck, taking home her first Oscar for Best Actress in a leading role. By the 70s, Hepburn stopped acting as regularly, turning her sights to humanitarian efforts. Hepburn is buried in a small cemetery in Tolochenaz, Switzerland, the small village she lived in from 1963 until her death. Judy Garland is one of Hollywood's greatest legends of the screen, but it's no secret that behind the camera, she lived a tragic life. Her mother, a success-oriented stage mom, was dubbed by the star herself as the real Wicked Witch of the West. And before Garland even turned 10, she was feeding her pills, both to sleep and to keep her energy levels high. Substance abuse problems would follow her for the rest of her life. Beyond The Wizard of Oz, she starred in movies like 1944's Meet Me in St. Louis and 1954's A Star is Born, performing until her untimely death at the age of 47 in 1969 from an accidental overdose. Garland reportedly did not die wealthy and owed a staggering $4 million to the IRS. She was initially buried at the Ferncliff Cemetery in New York, but in 2017, it was reported that her family had her moved to Hollywood, where she was laid to rest with honors in the Judy Garland Pavilion, a mausoleum at the Hollywood Forever Cemetery in Los Angeles. Known for her sultry good looks and throaty voice, Lauren Bacall was a quintessential glamour girl of Hollywood's golden age. Born Betty Joan Persky, her career took off in the early 40s when she found success as a model, posing for Harper's Bazaar in 1943. It's then that she was spotted by Nancy Hawkes, the wife of film director Howard Hawks. The star's powerful presence shot to the top of the A-list almost immediately. She found success with her first big screen role, 1944's To Have and Have Not, opposite Humphrey Bogart. It wasn't just professional triumph that Bacall snagged with that role, however. She also won over the heart of Bogey himself, who at the time was a married man. The pair wed on May 21, 1945, and stayed together until his death in 1957. Bacall died on August 12, 2014 at the age of 89. Like her husband, she was buried in the Garden of Memory at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Clark Gable will forever be remembered as the mustachioed heartthrob uttering one of cinema's most classic yet cruel exit lines in 1939's Gone with the Wind.
Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn.
Although Gable wasn't conventionally attractive by the standards of his era, he was still dubbed the King of Hollywood, thanks to a 1938 national poll. Gable's rise to the A-list was an interesting one that came by way of his first wife. According to the Los Angeles Times, the actor's better half, Josephine Dillon, ran an acting clinic where she would coach stage actors in the skills they needed to transition to making movies. It was through Dillon that Gable truly perfected his acting chops, and after acting in 1931's The Painted Desert, MGM offered him a contract. The rest, as they say, was history, and by the end of the year, Gable had established himself as a leading man. Clark Gable died on November 16, 1960, at the age of 59, after suffering from 2 heart attacks. Like many of his classic movie star peers, he was buried at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. While Marlene Dietrich's image was carefully crafted like many of her industry peers, she was nothing like Hollywood had seen before. Born in Berlin, Germany, the future Touch of Evil star knew she was interested in acting as early as her teens. By the late 20s, Dietrich made herself a part of film history by appearing in Germany's first talkie, Der Blaue Engel, in 1930. It was shot again in English using the same cast, and thus set Dietrich on the map in America too. Dietrich is remembered as one of Tinseltown's greatest stars due to her voice and alluring charisma. As author Amy Lawrence explains for the Criterion Collection's Dietrich and von Sternberg in Hollywood, Dietrich was labeled as a bad girl, an unconventional antithesis of an American girl that added spice to her roles. The Morocco actor died in Paris on May 6, 1992. According to Lonely Planet, she was buried in Städtischer Friedhof 3, a small cemetery in Berlin with a modest plot. In terms of Hollywood royalty, Grace Kelly may actually top that list because she quite literally left the bright lights of Tinseltown to become a full-fledged princess. Prior to becoming Grace of Monaco, Grace Kelly was one of Alfred Hitchcock's many muses, starring in Dial M for Murder, Rear Window, and To Catch a Thief. What's more, the Philadelphia-born star was also an Oscar winner, taking home an Academy Award for her role in 1954's The Country Girl opposite Bing Crosby. A mere 2 years later, Grace gave up her life in Hollywood after meeting Prince Rainier III of Monaco, whom she married in an elaborate ceremony on April 19, 1956. Tragically, Grace Kelly's life was cut short on September 13, 1982, after she died in a car crash. Per UPI, the Monaco royal family buried the star in a private ceremony at the Cathedral of Monaco. Quite possibly the most iconic child star to ever grace Hollywood's silver screen, Shirley Temple is legendary. Throughout her film career, which spanned from the mid-30s all the way to the late 40s, Temple completed nearly 60 different movies, all before the age of 22. Retiring from filmmaking in her 20s, Temple avoided falling into a spiral that sometimes plagues former child stars. Instead, Temple turned to politics, working in the State Department as an ambassador to Ghana and Czechoslovakia, among other roles, taking the name Shirley Temple Black after her husband, Charles Black.
It must be hard for an awful lot of people to take Shirley Temple seriously.
But Shirley Temple Black, I think they are.
Shirley Temple died on February 10, 2014, at the age of 85. She was buried in the Alta Mesa Memorial Park in Palo Alto, California. In 1941, Orson Welles released Citizen Kane. Today, it is considered by many cinephiles as the greatest movie ever made. Welles' ascent to the A-list began at the age of 19 after the young actor made his Broadway debut with Romeo and Juliet. From the stage, he turned to radio, running a weekly theater show on CBS, where, in 1938, Welles aired his adaptation of H.G. Wells' novel The War of the Worlds. With Hollywood studios suddenly zeroing in on the 24-year-old genius, Welles signed a $225,000 contract with film company RKO in 1940, promising total creative control for him to direct, write, and produce 2 films, the first of which was Citizen Kane. On October 10, 1985, Welles died from a heart attack in Los Angeles. Per AP, 2 years later, his daughter held a ceremony burying Wells's ashes on a farm in Malaga, Spain, a request he made in his will.
Tippi Hedren is probably best known for her starring roles in Alfred Hitchcock's films The Birds and Marnie. Then she disappeared. This is the untold truth of Tippi Hedren. Born Natalie K. Hedren on January 19, 1930 in New Ulm, Minnesota, to parents of German and Scandinavian descent, Tippi Hedren was very much a Midwestern girl. Her father, Bernard Hedren, owned a general store, and her mother, Dorothea, was a schoolteacher. Although her birth certificate states her name as Natalie K., Hedren is known to the rest of the world as Tippi. This was actually a nickname given to her as a baby by her father. The pet name ended up sticking, and Tippi continued to use the name in her professional life in honor of her father. Tippi spent most of her childhood in Minnesota, where her blonde hair and good looks started to win notice from local fashion shows and advertisers. However, when she was a junior in high school, she and her parents had to leave Minnesota when her father's health started failing. The family ended up relocating to San Diego, California, in the hopes that the warmer climate would prove helpful. Luckily, Tippi Hedren's classic features and blonde beauty attracted just as much notice in California as they did in Minnesota. She was still able to continue her modeling career after her family made their big move further west. And being in California actually gave the young Hedren even more opportunities to advance her career in the entertainment industry. While she was mostly focused on modeling, Hedren managed to get her first film gig, a bit part in the movie The Pretty Girl, during her first year studying art at Pasadena City College. In 1951, Hedren moved to New York, and with her lovely looks, her face soon appeared on many fashion magazine covers. Later on, Hedren would start appearing in television commercials. At this point, she was a single mother, having just divorced her first husband, and commercial work helped pay the bills. And not only did the commercials help provide Hedren a stable living for herself and her daughter, but they would help jumpstart her career into real films. After her first divorce, Tippi Hedren left New York to return to California. It was in California that Hedren was discovered by the iconic film director Alfred Hitchcock. After seeing her in a diet drink commercial, Hitchcock offered her a 7-year contract. Soon after, Hedren landed the starring role of Melanie Daniels in Hitchcock's 1963 cult horror movie, The Birds.
That was the commercial that Alfred Hitchcock saw, and he said to his people at Universal, "Find the girl."
As most would assume, Hedren believed that the actual killer birds would be fake, but Hedren was shocked to learn that she would be acting with real birds. The crew claimed that the mechanical birds weren't working, a claim that is suspected of having been perpetuated by Hitchcock himself as an excuse to use the live birds. Not only did Hedren have to film her scene with live birds thrown directly at her, but a few were actually loosely tied to her costume. And the birds did exactly what they were trained to do: attack, claw, and peck her. Hedren even sustained some injuries during filming, including a bad cut near her eye from one of the birds' beaks. Despite the almost unbearable pain Tippi Hedren had to endure while filming The Birds, the movie did turn out to be a massive hit with critics and audiences. Hedren herself received high praise and acclaim for her performance in the starring role. In fact, The Birds would lead to Hedren receiving her first and only Golden Globe Award in 1964 for Most Promising Female Newcomer. This is now a defunct Golden Globe Award category today, but still a highly prominent award. It looked like Hedren's star was on the rise. She just had a hit movie with a starring breakout role, fame, prestige, and Alfred Hitchcock had cast her in the titular role of his latest film, the psychological thriller Marnie. Hedren was going places in 1964, but no one knew the true horror that Hedren was fighting behind the scenes. As dramatized in the 2012 film The Girl, Hedren and Hitchcock's relationship was anything but stable. Working with a renowned director like Alfred Hitchcock should have guaranteed Tippi Hedren instant success. And it did, for a while. After receiving such praise and fame for The Birds, Hedren looked like she was going to be Hollywood's biggest star. But behind the silver screen, Hedren was dealing with a real live monster, Hitchcock himself. Hitchcock was a brilliant director, but he was also a notoriously awful bully. Hitchcock had become obsessed with the beautiful blonde Hedren. As much as he coached Hedren while on set, Hitchcock wanted total control over her. In an interview with the Virginian Pilot, Hedren recalled how Hitchcock would never let anyone on set talk to her or have anything to do with her. He even tried to dictate what clothes she wore in public. Then he started making unwanted advances, harassing Hedren at every turn.
I love you.
Hedren would have nothing to do with Hitchcock's advances and wouldn't stand for his treatment, much to the director's rage. As a sick joke, Hitchcock apparently sent Hedren's daughter, Melanie, a toy coffin containing a doll made up to look like her mother. The young Melanie was terrified. Eventually, Hedren couldn't tolerate working with Hitchcock anymore. After finishing Marnie, Hedren said she wouldn't work with him again and wanted out of her contract. After suffering too long while working under Alfred Hitchcock, Tippi Hedren knew she couldn't work with him anymore. She wanted out of her original 7-year contract. Furious at Hedren's rejection, Hitchcock refused to release Hedren from her contract and threatened to destroy her entire career. But no amount of threats would make it worth it for Hedren to endure Hitchcock's harassment any longer. Hedren told Variety, "When he told me that he would ruin me, I just told him do what he had to do. I went out of the door and slammed it so hard that I looked back to see if it was still on its hinges." Unfortunately, at that point, Hitchcock was still able to wield power over Hedren's career. He held fast to that 7-year contract. Hedren would be paid, but she never performed. Hitchcock not only refused to cast her in any more pictures, but he wouldn't allow any other studio to cast her either. In the 60s, Hedren was considered a hot actress, meaning that she was popular and highly regarded. Other studios were dying to work with her, but whenever a studio executive inquired with Hitchcock about working with Hedren, he would tell them she wasn't available. He blocked any promising career opportunity for the actress. It was 3 years before Hedren was finally free of the director for good.
It is the worst thing to be the object of someone's obsession if you're not interested.
After she was finally free of Alfred Hitchcock, Tippi Hedren needed to rebuild. Hitchcock, unfortunately, had done a number on her acting career. While once she was considered an in-demand actress, by the time Hedren's contract with Hitchcock was finally over, Hollywood had noticeably cooled towards her. As noted by Variety, she'd just spent too much time away from the big screen and major projects. Although her career would never be the same again, Hedren still fought to carve out space for herself in the entertainment industry. However, Hedren did manage to find some modest success in television. She did a few TV movies and also landed a few regular roles on soap operas, sitcoms, and other TV shows. In addition to her TV work, Hedren was also able to devote a lot of time to animal welfare causes. And despite her troubles in Hollywood, Hedren's daughter, Melanie Griffith, became a major Hollywood film actress, as did Hedren's granddaughter, actress Dakota Johnson. In the 1970s, during the height of the Vietnam War, Tippi Hedren was doing humanitarian work with Vietnamese refugees. One such endeavor involved Hedren working with 20 Vietnamese refugee women and helping them to resettle in the United States. And the women were apparently quite fascinated by Hedren's manicured fingernails, as Hedren explained in an interview with the BBC. "We were trying to find vocations for them. I brought in seamstresses and typists, any way for them to learn something, and they loved my fingernails." This gave Hedren an idea. She brought her personal manicurist to the Hope Village refugee camp in California to show the women how to do professional Beverly Hills-style manicures. Hedren also recruited the local beauty schools to take the women on as students. Upon graduating from beauty school, the students got jobs all over Southern California, thanks to Hedren's help. In recalling the experience, Hedren said in an interview, "I loved these women so much that I wanted something good to happen for them after losing literally everything." And these refugee women were incredibly bright. Most of them were the wives of military officers, and at least one of them was in military intelligence. As noted by NPR, Hedren may have been the initial spark that helped jumpstart the Vietnamese-American nail industry, but these women were the ones who turned it into an $8 billion industry. Roar is considered one of the most dangerous films ever made. It was very much a family picture, literally. It starred Tippi Hedren with her second husband, Noel Marshall, who wrote, directed, and produced the film. Marshall's sons, John and Jerry, also acted in the movie, along with Hedren's daughter, Melanie. Also starring alongside the family was a legion of big cats. The film was about a family on a wildlife preserve, and the filming of the movie itself was definitely wild. There were multiple instances of people on set getting injured from altercations with the animals, who were apparently not as well trained as expected. In fact, according to IndieWire, the tagline for Roar became, "No animals were harmed in the making of this movie. 70 members of the cast and crew were." Among those injured on the set included Hedren and her family. Hedren had to get 38 stitches after being bitten by a lion and also endured a fractured leg and multiple scalp wounds. Her husband was injured so many times he ended up in the hospital for gangrene. Daughter Melanie was mauled so badly by a lion that she needed facial reconstructive surgery. The movie's filming was supposed to take only 9 months, but the entire project ended up taking 5 years to complete. Roar cost $17 million to make, and the movie only made $2 million after it was finally released. Besides acting, Tippi Hedren's other greatest love is animals, especially big cats. Even the ordeal of filming Roar never dampened her passion for them. She apparently was always a cat person and has owned many house cats over the years. At one point, she was engaged to veterinarian Martin Dennis. The story goes that the two of them broke up over their differing opinions on declawing cats. He was pro-declawing, and Hedren was against it. This extreme difference of opinion apparently made it impossible to keep their relationship together, and the two broke up. In the 70s, Hedren became a great animal and conservation advocate, which eventually led her to establish the Shambhala Preserve for wild cats. Hedren explained to the Los Angeles Times that Shambhala was strictly for protecting and preserving these magnificent animals. Hedren told the newspaper, "There is no breeding, no buying, and no selling. When an animal comes here, it is here for life." In fact, at one point, Hedren had a real pet lion named Neil living in her house. Life magazine did a full photo spread of Neil living in Hedren's home among the family. Although Hedren later admitted that a lion in the house was probably not a great idea in retrospect. Still, Hedren's granddaughter, Dakota Johnson, confirmed during a 2020 appearance on The Graham Norton Show that her 91-year-old grandmother to this day is still happily living on the preserve with, quote, 13 or 14 lions and tigers. One of the most famous women in the world was found dead in the early hours of August 5, 1962. Since then, conflicting accounts and conspiracy theories have fought for attention. This is what it was really like the day Marilyn Monroe died. Exactly when Marilyn Monroe died is still unclear. Several key witnesses changed their stories over the years, most notably Monroe's housekeeper, Eunice Murray, who was the first to raise the alarm. Murray said that Monroe went to bed around 7:30 p.m. on Saturday, August 4, 1962, and that was the last time she saw her alive.
She said, "Good night, Mrs. Murray. I think I'll turn in now."
Two other witnesses, actor Peter Lawford, who was the brother-in-law to John and Robert Kennedy, and Joe DiMaggio Jr., Monroe's former stepson, said they spoke to her on the phone around that time, but their accounts of her mood contradict each other. Murray revealed that she knocked on Monroe's door at around midnight, and when there was no answer, she called Monroe's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson. Greenson and Murray went outside and saw through the first-floor bedroom window that Monroe was lying motionless, face down on her bed. Murray and Greenson broke into the room through a window. Unable to rouse Monroe, Greenson called her physician, Dr. Hyman Engelberg, who reportedly arrived a little while later. The Los Angeles Times reported that at 4:20 a.m., Engelberg called the police and reported that Monroe was dead.
I suspected that she'd been dead at least a few hours.
The police arrived approximately 5 to 10 minutes later. This account leaves a significant gap between Murray finding the body and the police being called. Murray later changed her story, saying that she found Monroe at around 3 a.m. after noticing light under her bedroom door and being unable to wake her or get into the room. It wasn't until Monday, August 6th, that major newspapers made Marilyn Monroe's death front-page news. Bernie Taupin and Elton John's famous tribute to Monroe, Candle in the Wind, would later claim all the papers had to say was that Marilyn was found in the nude. In fact, the newspapers were at least as interested in another salacious detail, and that was the drugs at the scene. The New York Times, BBC, LA Times, New York Daily Times, and Variety all reported on the empty bottle of Nambutal, a sleeping medication that was found near Monroe's body. According to the LA Times, it had been prescribed by Dr. Engelberg just a few days before her death and had contained 40 to 50 capsules when filled. The New York Times added that the nightstand held 14 other medication bottles. PBS later reported that Monroe was known to regularly mix barbiturates, opiates, amphetamines, and alcohol. By August 6th, the LA County coroner had told the press that an autopsy had shown that Monroe likely died of a drug overdose, and later described her death as a probable suicide. However, medical examiner Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who performed the autopsy, eventually admitted that samples from Monroe's intestines and stomach were lost before they could be put through toxicology tests. This has fueled conspiracy theories, but a 1982 investigation by the LA District Attorney agreed that Monroe's death was likely caused by an overdose, whether intentional or accidental. No one can know exactly what was going through Marilyn Monroe's head in her final moments, but that hasn't stopped plenty of people piling in with their opinions. One school of thought suggests that Monroe was more depressed than ever just before her death. She was divorced from her third husband, Arthur Miller, and during the marriage she had been through several miscarriages. Career-wise, her last 2 movies had been disappointments at the box office. On top of that, 1961's The Misfits had been tainted by disagreements with Miller, who had written the script. She'd also recently been fired from the movie Something's Got to Give, co-starring Dean Martin. In contrast, some have argued that despite her concerning drug and alcohol use, Monroe was slowly turning a corner. She'd bought her first home in March 1961 and was adding her personal touches to it, planting an herb garden and ordering furniture and tapestries from Mexico. According to the BBC, she and Joe DiMaggio were planning to remarry soon, and she was returning to work on Something's Got to Give. Even the people who were with Monroe or spoke to her on her final day disagreed over her mood and will likely never know what she was feeling. There are many conspiracies surrounding Marilyn Monroe's death. All are far more elaborate than the explanation that the actress accidentally or intentionally overdosed. Possibly the most famous conspiracy involves Robert F. Kennedy, then Attorney General and brother of President John F. Kennedy. The story goes that Monroe had affairs with both Kennedy brothers and wrote down details and state secrets in a diary that mysteriously went missing after her death.
The Kennedys were a very important part of Marilyn's life.
According to the LA Times, Peter Lawford's ex-wife, Deborah Gould, and private detective Fred O'Tash have both claimed that Robert Kennedy was present the night Monroe died, and an argument between them pushed her to suicide. They said that Lawford, then married to the Kennedy brothers' sister Patricia, helped smuggle Robert back to Northern California to avert suspicion and destroyed evidence. Another conspiracy has Robert, or the mob, murdering Monroe with an Nembutal suppository. Lawford, unsurprisingly, denied these accusations. His fourth wife confirmed that Lawford did work with O'Tash, and he called him the night Monroe died, but she claimed it was regarding Monroe's apparent suicide. Lawford admitted that he spoke to Monroe the night of her death and said that he was gravely worried that she was suicidal, not that she was about to be murdered. Marilyn Monroe had been poised to make a triumphant return to a movie she had previously been fired from when she died suddenly. Monroe could be magic on camera, but capturing that magic was reportedly a grueling process. She had terrible stage fright and anxiety and struggled to remember her lines. She showed up late if she showed up at all. Her drug and alcohol addictions only exacerbated the issues. In 1962, Monroe was cast in Something's Got to Give, a remake of a 1940 movie opposite Dean Martin. She frequently failed to turn up to set, usually citing illness, the LA Times reports, and Monroe had been ill. After finishing The Misfits 18 months previously, the star had undergone surgeries to treat endometriosis and remove her gallbladder, and had been treated in a psychiatric clinic after divorcing Arthur Miller. On June 1st, Monroe turned 36 on set. On June 8th, having missed 17 of the 30 shooting days so far, she was fired from Something's Got to Give. Fox cited what it called willfully disruptive behavior. However, Monroe's co-star Martin rebelled, refusing to work with any other actress. Monroe took to the press to prove that she was not only capable of working, but a draw for fans. On August 1st, she was rehired to the production. However, when she was found dead on August 5th, the movie was canceled for good. On January 14, 1954, less than 2 years after meeting, Marilyn Monroe and baseball star Joe DiMaggio eloped. However, arguments over her career and inability to conceive saw Monroe file for divorce in October 1954, citing mental cruelty. Despite their short and tumultuous marriage, Monroe and DiMaggio eventually became good friends. When Monroe was admitted against her will to a psychiatric hospital in 1961, she called DiMaggio for help, and he got her out, the New York Times reports. There were also rumors that the couple had planned to remarry before her sudden death. According to the Washington Post, DiMaggio learned of Monroe's death from his sister, who had heard the news on the radio. He immediately flew to LA, collected her body, and took charge of funeral arrangements, with help from Monroe's business manager. DiMaggio spent the night of August 5th sitting with Monroe's body. He even picked out the green sheath dress the icon was buried in. DiMaggio refused to allow many of Monroe's Hollywood connections to attend her funeral, reportedly saying if it wasn't for them, she'd still be here. Marilyn Monroe met her third husband, Arthur Miller, the year before meeting her second husband, Joe DiMaggio. It was on a movie set in 1951. Miller was married and Monroe was having a fling with one of his friends. 4 years and 1 divorce later, they started an affair. Miller eventually got a quickie divorce in Reno, Nevada, and on June 29, 1956, he and Monroe legally married. The couple had a Jewish ceremony 2 days later, which Monroe had converted for. Sadly, Miller and Monroe's marriage was undermined by his snobbery and her emotional issues. They split while making The Misfits and announced their divorce on November 11, 1960. Miller remarried a year after the separation. On August 6, 1962, the day after Monroe's body was found, the New York Times reported that when Miller was asked if he had a comment on her death, he was typically aloof, saying, "I don't really." Miller was criticized for not attending Monroe's funeral on August 8th. However, in an unpublished essay written that day and made public in 2018, he expressed his anger with the Hollywood elite and executives he felt had destroyed Monroe. In the essay, he expressed a sentiment Joe DiMaggio apparently shared, writing, "Let the public mourners finish the mockery. Most of them there destroyed her." Marilyn Monroe's second and third husbands were famous in their own right, but it was her first husband whose unstarry job meant he was one of the very first people to hear about her death. Monroe married James Dougherty on June 19, 1942, less than 3 weeks after her 16th birthday, when he was 21. Back then, her name was Norma Jean Baker. Monroe had been raised by a series of foster families, and they hoped this marriage to a kind neighbor would give her stability. Dougherty joined the Merchant Marines in 1944 and was soon dispatched to the South Pacific. In the meantime, Monroe started working on her modeling and acting career. She divorced Dougherty in 1946. Dougherty remarried soon after and became a police officer in Los Angeles. He was on patrol when a colleague who had been to Monroe's house called to tell him that she was dead. In comments reflecting those of Monroe's other ex-husbands, he told CNN in 2003, "She was such a pure and innocent soul. The movie industry abused her and used her." On August 6th, the New York Times reported that actress Sophia Loren cried when she heard the news. The newspaper also wrote that Kay Gable, whose late husband Clark Gable had worked with Monroe on 1961's The Misfits, went straight to Mass to pray. According to Vanity Fair, author Truman Capote couldn't believe Monroe was dead, writing, "She was such a good-hearted girl. So pure, really. So much on the side of the angels." One person whose response many people were interested in was the wife of the man Monroe had supposedly had an affair with. That would be First Lady Jackie Kennedy. Jackie remained characteristically demure on the subject, at least in public. But after the assassination of her husband on November 22, 1963, she reportedly told a priest, "I was glad that Marilyn Monroe got out of her misery." The day Marilyn Monroe's death made headlines coincided with the 34th birthday of a commercial artist who had long been fascinated by her. Andy Warhol immediately started working on the first of several artworks he made featuring Monroe's image. Back then, Warhol's day job was drawing pictures for ads. In his spare time, he poured his expertise in branding into creating pop art. To Warhol, Monroe was the perfect example of intoxicating Hollywood celebrity, which saw stars repurposed as brands. He was also intrigued by death. Using a publicity still from Monroe's 1953 movie, Niagara, Warhol printed her face 50 times in a grid. The work showed the contrast between Marilyn the movie star, painted to attract attention, and Marilyn the person, always just out of view from her adoring public. Marilyn Monroe was dead, but her famous face would always be frozen in time, never evolving and never forgotten. If you or anyone you know is struggling with addiction issues, help is available. Visit the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration website or contact SAMHSA's national helpline at 1-800-662-HELP 4357.